Hello, my fellow Westorians. It's another Sunday. It's time for more Valar Rereadis. Let's see what today brings us, my fellow Westorians, and Dancing Sean of House Beard. How are you doing today, my friend? What are you drinking?
I'm doing well. It's great to be here. I have a delicious beverage. This is the mango naked drink mixed with a coconut pineapple sparkling ice, and of course mixed with Mountain Dew.
Of course. The basis
very sweet and citrusy.
You really like to take it from a almost healthy drink to a not nearly as healthy drink.
I want that caffeine in there.
It's hard to have a healthy beverage when your basis for everything is Mountain Dew. So imagine a soup where the broth is a Mountain Dew. Okay, no, I do not want to think about that. Stop thinking about that, everyone. Don't do that.
I can't stop thinking.
Let's change the subject. So, Sean, you have been talking about movie stuff. You know, you've got your channel, and you have done short videos on movies that were up for awards. But recently, you've been thinking about maybe doing some underrated films, things that are maybe not gotten as much attention that you think are worthy of more attention. Are there any in particular that you're thinking about, or just the process that's something you want to mention?
Yeah, I've actually got a lot in my brain that I want to do. I need to buckle down and get it done. Because I kind of want to build a catalog. I want to do some sort of classic movies that most people have seen, just so that you can see how my reviews are going.
Yeah.
So I'll do Indiana Jones and Star Wars or whatever, but also want to do things that maybe everyone hasn't seen or maybe even isn't aware of. Maybe underrated movies, Hedwig and the Angry Inch, or foreign movies, Amelie, maybe even movies that are kind of well known, but maybe not as highly thought of as I thought, and maybe some movies you haven't even heard of. I'm kind of the point of my channel is to get people to watch good movies, whether it's great movies that you haven't gotten to yet, or movies you haven't even heard of, and even great movies you haven't gotten to yet. There's going to be some that you're going to end up liking more than others, and I want to give people an idea up front what type it's going to be. Is it going to be serious? Is it going to be funny? Is it going to be romantic? Is it going to be dark, etc.?
And underrated is a harder category than just films that are up for awards. That gives you a starting point. So underrated means you have to think about more what that means and take into account what other people are thinking and things like that.
I made a post on Facebook about that and exploded to 100 comments, both people talking about the movies they think are underrated and talking about what it means to be underrated. So it's a ripe territory, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing to hear what other people think of underrated, whether it's how it appears on IMDb, how many people bought tickets to see it, what kind of ratings it has, what critics think of it. Yeah, there's it's everyone's got their own definitions. That's part of what makes it interesting in the first place. So let's see here. Thanks to Nina for her help on the Hedge Night. We've gotten a lot of great takes from her. I've got a couple of particularly exciting ones today that I'm excited to talk about. Excited things that I'm excited to talk about. Yeah. Report me to the Department of Redundancy Department yet again. I think I've been sent there at least twice in the past 2 weeks. So we should be able to finish the Hedge Night today. I think we'll be able to do that. Maybe we'll go a little extra long just to make sure, which is cool because then we'll get started with the Sworn Sword next week. And the two stories kind of, the way the Sworn Sword begins versus the way the Hedge Night ends, they really kind of bleed into each other, even though quite a lot of time has passed, because it sticks with these familiar sort of plot-centric ideas while maintaining its feel, its themes of these two characters learning each other and working together and getting into adventures.
I'll probably mention it when we start that, but I did catch that. How does the Hedge Night start? It's raining.
Yeah.
How's the Sworn Sword start? It's a drought.
Oh, good call. Good call. And how does the third one start? I don't remember. That's we'll have to check on that. Some sort of.
I seem to remember it was hot, but I don't know if it was a drought.
Maybe it's just humid, so it's in between. You've got the heat. You've got the heat of the desert, but the humidity of the.
It's just really windy.
Yeah, you need windy. We definitely don't have snow. We know it's not snowing there, so Blood Raven's around, so there's definitely going to be a little bit of mist at the least. So let's start with the reveal. One of the, it's a fun moment, of course, when Egg reveals who he is. There's a lot of clues that he's someone else, but it isn't really something that the plot focuses on. It's not like, who is this guy? It's just kind of out of nowhere. It's a lot along the lines of the way George does a lot of mysteries. He doesn't even tell you there's a mystery sometimes. He just gives you the answer that you didn't know there was something in secret all this time. And you're like, oh, this has been a mystery this whole time. So that's kind of neat. I think you told me you already knew who Egg was before you read this the first time. Is that right? So it wasn't really a surprise for you?
Correct. But still, it was still I don't know how to say this, an exciting moment when, was it Raymond giving Dunk a rundown of the different princes?
Yeah.
And just as he's about to mention Egg bursts in and like, what's that guy, that meme?
Yeah, what is that? Which one are you thinking of? What meme are you thinking of?
Oh, of course, Aziz cannot see Sean, so he has no idea the gesture Sean
the
did.
guy that like taps his forehead like,
oh yeah,
I got you.
That one. Okay, yes, that guy. Yes, he's ubiquitous. So yeah, Dunk doesn't really give much thought to the matter. He's not like, I wonder who this kid is. It just kind of goes by. So I wonder, anytime a Targaryen is revealed, which, you know, there's going to be at least one more in the main series, and perhaps one revealed to not actually be a Targaryen. So we may have the reversal, like, actually, this guy's not a Targaryen. So we may have that happen, both of those things happen, one with Jon, one with young Griff. So it's things like this where it's not just the reveal of Egg. It's like, well, George is going to be doing this again. Is this like a warm-up for him? Is he practicing the Jon reveal?
Yeah.
Is it like, how is he going to do this? That's what I think about, because we already know the answer here. We already know the secret, but we know there's going to be more secrets of this ilk that come into play, much bigger ones. Like whenever the reveal with Jon happens, it'll probably be a multi-stage reveal, because you got all these different characters that have to react to it, and then Jon himself has to react to it. So it's not just going to be like this, where Dunk is really the only one that reacts to it, because Aryen's like, hey, what happened to your hair, brother? You know? So Nina writes also that it's maybe a bit of foreshadowing for the future of their story, when he says, how many Aegons have been king? And Aegon responds, 4 Aegons have been king, and he'll be the 5th. So, and if young Griff, if that all plays out, if he's actually crowned, which I think he will be, because part of the prophecy around Dany is that she'll slay these lies, and that would be a pretty big lie to slay. So, if he's crowned, he would be the 6th Aegon. Whether that counts in retrospect is another question, but he is still an Aegon, so that's kind of neat.
You know, I thought I had about that, not just how many Aegons there have been, but a lot of the other Targaryens and kings. So there's a lot of repeating names, you know, and sometimes it's even hard. I finally started to sort out some of them, you know, but it's kind of how the real world went too. There were so many Charleses and Philips and Edwards in European history. I remember the Daniele Bolelli podcast about Joan of Arc. He kind of joked about, I know this is hard to follow. But,
my favorite example is the show The Last Kingdom and the books and the real history, where I like to think I'm good at this. But when they're all just like Alfred and Aelfred, I can't. It's very difficult for me. I finally understand where some people are with A Song of Ice and Fire.
Yeah, so it's real history is way
Ethelred,
worse than this. That's the thing, folks. Like all these Aegons and Darons, it's nothing compared to all the Louis and Charleses and Edwards, and yeah, it's wild. And Shea mentioned The Last Kingdom. That's funny because it's got all the AE names. Like everyone's name starts with AE, which is like, you think Aegon is confusing. Well, there's only Aegon and Aemon. Like the AEs are at least like halfway through the name.
Hey, we've got like Aerys.
Yeah, true. There's more. There's Aerion, Aerys.
There's
like
more, but
Aethelflaed and Aethelred.
Yeah, that seems really hard. But still, there's a lot of fans that could say the exact same thing.
Yeah.
You got Aegon, you got Aemon. It's hard.
Remember the TV, and even Dunk is expressing it's like, how many damn Aegons have been king? Like, even in world, characters are like in on the joke. Like, that's how it would be. Like, yeah. Like, we're all like, how many Kennedys are there? How many Bushes are there? There's lots of them, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So, some of this happens or progresses towards Dunk being in a cell. Something is somewhat familiar to A Song of Ice and Fire POVs. There's been a lot of chapters of characters in cells. This doesn't last very long. He's not in jail very long. It goes pretty quickly. He has this discussion with Egg. Egg apologizes to him for, the deception, not realizing it could get Dunk in trouble, which that's kind of a recurring theme, even when nobility are trying to be decent. Sometimes just who they are, just their presence has an impact on what's happening around them, and sometimes that impact is negative. And of course, this is an example of that. But obviously, the biggest thing is, Egg didn't make Dunk attack Tanzel, but he did go get him, knowing probably what would happen. I guess it's just a no chance, no choice situation, right? That's we come back to that. There's this great quote here that is pretty important. I think it's maybe one of the, if we were to rank them, the quotes in this story, this one might fall in the top 5 for most important, just for the many different things it describes, explains, and touches on. Here it is.
Oh, sorry, which one is this?
Dunk looked at him.
Dunk looked at him.
Mm-hmm.
Dunk looked at him thoughtfully. He knew what it was like to want something so badly that you would tell a monstrous lie just to get near it. I thought you were like me, he said. Might be you are, only not the way I thought.
Yeah.
So I have a question here. What do y'all think the two ways that they're alike are? The way that Dunk would have thought they were like him, that Egg would have thought, which I think we know, but what is Egg saying here?
Well, I think
that they're both decent people?
Yes, I do think that. I think that he thought that he was an orphan boy like him.
Yes.
But that's the part that he's not, but he is like a big-hearted guy, one who cares about other people, no matter how poor they are, and cares about justice. Is that how you interpret it, Sean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They thought they were alike and that they were low-born, or there's all kinds of ways that they thought they were alike, but realizing there's other ways they're alike that are even more important.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Good said. That is what it comes down to. That's the thing that ultimately, I think, keeps them together. Obviously, Egg couldn't know that about him at first, when he just was trying to get away from Daron and just go to the tournament and just do anything other than hang out with his drunk older brother who's kind of not doing anything. Like, he was bored. It's not just, and he wanted to, it's a lot of things, really.
And maybe Egg really just had no one else that he could call to this, but I mean, I think it just shows how safe Egg felt with Dunk already, how much he just got a good vibe from him.
Yeah, he knew that this is the man to run to. Like, he explained, it comes up during the conversation, like, why didn't you run to the castle? He was like, well, I didn't think I could get there in time. It was so far away. And those are pretty good reasons. The woman is being injured in that moment. You definitely don't have much time. So
I think it was an emotional choice, though, just as much.
Yeah,
I agree. He plays it off as that, but I think Egg is a little boy who ran to the person that he thinks would keep him safe.
So it might be some post facto justification. He might be like, no, I would have run to him anyway.
Yeah. And it made sense. It was like the right call, but I think it was colored by that.
That's a great point. Yeah, that might be.
I almost don't want to say this because I don't want to spin it too negatively, but there might have been an amount of selfishness. Egg could have just revealed himself at the moment and ordered those guards, hey, stand back, set her free. It may or may not have worked, but he would have had to give up his secret life. You know what I mean? To do that.
I agree with that. A lot of that. I think that Egg has enough fear of Arryn that he can't trust. He doesn't feel like he can even trust the royal guard right there. Whether that's logical or anything, I think it shows how he is very fearful of Arryn.
Yeah, I don't think he wanted to challenge Arryn without someone to back him up. quite possibly. But that's a good point, because he did like order them to stop, but only when Dunk was there.
Yeah, they ordered him to stop attacking Dunk right after
He
Dunk
said,
had
"Let them
already
go."
intervened.
Yes.
Yeah,
when they were about to, like, when Arion ordered awful things to happen, that's when Egg was like, okay, now I got to stop them from cutting his head off or whatever, or taking all his teeth out.
When Dunk was in trouble, then he no longer was worried about his fun life, you know.
Yeah.
I guess maybe his fun life was over anyway if Dunk gets killed. So
Guilty Undertaker also points out, strictly speaking, Arion outranks Egg.
Yeah, there is that.
Yeah.
Absolutely, good point.
I'm sure some of those guards, on some level, they're aware of the same thing. Who was it? Someone told. I can't remember the conversation. It was in a Game of Thrones, I think. They're like, look, if Joffrey says, go get his horse, go get his horse.
Tyrion.
If Joffrey says, kill all the horses in his stable, come talk to me first.
Yeah,
you know,
because he's not 16 yet. He's not able to.
Yeah.
They're allowed to overrule even the king because he hasn't reached his age of majority. That's what Tyrion's point was there. And the King's Guard in question is like, well, but I can't say no to the king. It's like, yeah, you can.
Yeah.
It's literally the law. You can in certain circumstances. So, but of course, there's more to it. Like, you don't want to piss off a king who's going to be able to do whatever he wants when he's 16. So they're thinking ahead. But anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Good thing Arion was never king, because that's exactly the kind of thing that would happen. So what's interesting, a particularly strong thing is here, Dunk continues to think about justice and blame and things like that, but he at no point seems to worry about himself. He doesn't really worry about the consequences until they're broached. Like, until Baelor's like, yeah, you might lose your hand, maybe your foot. He doesn't really think about the consequences for himself. He's still, even in jail, thinking about other people. He's like, damn, I might have gotten Tanzel in bigger trouble, you know? And that is a really big sign of the kind of person he is. In his own internal monologue, he's still not thinking about himself. That's the kind of thing that POV structure gives you that you can't get from a narrator. You can't be certain that this character is actually thinking these things, right? You can't be sure that it's honest if it's coming from dialogue. But when you have their internal monologue, you know it's real as much as it ever can be. You know, they could be lying to themselves. There's unreliable self-narration, I suppose, but it's as close to the truth as we can ever get, I think. And I think that's something that's worth focusing on at times like this, when it really speaks to their character that we're getting at.
We've mentioned it a few times, but Dunk also thinks about the horses at that moment.
Right. Even the lesser beings, quote unquote lesser. I mean, I think it's fair to call horses lesser beings, but, you know, he's thinking about the suffering of anything, anyone that means anything to him. And it takes a big heart to do that. So he's wondering whether this is what's going to happen to them, but he still doesn't regret doing it. He doesn't regret, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have stepped in. It doesn't even seem to cross his mind, which just reminds us of Brienne again, just someone who does the right thing. Consequences don't even, it's not that they weigh the consequences and decide it's better to do the right thing. They just do the right thing. It's just a snap decision. There's no weighing. It's just instantly acting. It's
almost the same instinct you might have to, like, pull your hand away from a hot stove. You don't think, well, if I keep my hand here, it'll be burned. You know, you just instantly do it.
Yeah, it's like, this is wrong. I must do something. And when you're Dunk, I guess you maybe have a little more freedom to interfere or to feel like you can do something because you're a large person, you know, like that's what it probably, like if Egg was the size of Dunk, he may not have run off to get Dunk. He might have been like, look, I'm almost 7 feet tall, so I can do this myself.
He would have just tackled Arion. Oh,
yeah, like Arion probably wouldn't have picked on him so much if he was 7 feet tall. But anyway, so he still doesn't think of it as a mistake, even when Baelor states the obvious and says, you know, it's never a wise idea to strike a king's grandson. He still doesn't really, I shouldn't have done that. No, he's still like, nope, right is trumps might, etc. That always comes first, and I love that. So here's another really interesting quote for us to play with for a minute. I think this one's very meaningful.
Hedge knight is the truest kind of knight. Let me start that again. Hedge knight is the truest kind of knight, Dunk, the old man had told him a long, long time ago. Other knights serve the lords who keep them, or from whom they hold their lands, but we serve where we will, for men whose causes we believe in. Every knight swears to protect the weak and innocent, but we keep the vow best, I think. Queer how strong that memory seemed. Dunk had quite forgotten those words, and perhaps the old man had as well toward the end.
Yeah, let's start with that. What does that last line mean there? That's very peculiar, very mysterious. Like, what was Arlen slipping in his honor?
Yeah, there's kind of two parts to this quote to think about. One is the idea of a hedge knight at least potentially having better ability to be a true knight. They're less beholden to the will of some lord than they are to their vows to protect the innocent. I think we've even mentioned this before. If Joffrey tells some knight to go kill a cat or whatever, the knight just does it. But normally a hedge knight, like, I'm not killing a cat.
That's pretty much what happens with Micah, right?
An infant,
Yeah. I feel like part of here is that Arlen would have now been at the stage where he wouldn't help a cat. Okay. Dunk feels that you should help the cat, whereas a Kingsguard feels like if someone tells you to kill the cat, you kill the cat.
Yeah. That's the other thing here is the fact that Dunk, one, had almost forgotten the words himself, but wonders if Arlen had too. It makes you wonder if toward the end, if Arlen, maybe his standards were slipping. He was too old, or he was too desperate or too frustrated or becoming bitter. I don't want to be too negative, but something made Dunk think this. So maybe Arlen served some lord that was kind of crappy.
Desperation is a good point. Like, he's getting older. He's not going to have as much value to a lot of lords. That, like, the job of, like, if he's supposed to protect people, like, is he even capable of doing that? It's a very anxious lifestyle, not having like any means of retirement. I mean, it's sort of like you just expect to die in the line of duty, I guess. But that's tough to think about, and it's tough to reckon with if you try to put yourself in their place. Dunk is nowhere near that spot himself. He's young and healthy, so he may lack that perspective at this point. That may be part of why he doesn't understand it. But also, he's just young and not very worldly in the first place. So, but like along lines of what you're saying, the hedge knights are also among the common folk more often, just the people you have more conversations with. They're not sitting in the high halls and having their dinners with the fancy people. Dunk is constantly among people of a similar socioeconomic status, so he's more aware of what their day-to-day struggles are. So that's a great point. It's something to back up what Arlen is saying there, that they may keep those vows best because perhaps they're more associated with those troubles. They're confronted with these issues that the true knights are supposed to be solving. Sitting in a castle can give you some detachment from a lot of these issues. And that gets into this very important under the radar, or not under the radar. It actually comes front and center here towards the end. Baelor's loaded question, but very poignant question of how, so I ask you again, Sir Duncan the Tall, how good a knight are you truly? So there's good knights and there's good knights. And in this case, Baelor's asking, how good are you? In quotes, meaning like, how good are you at fighting? Because ultimately that's what we just touched on. If Arlen isn't capable of fighting anymore, then is he really even a hedge knight? And then that gets into the desperation angles and all that. So how does this line resonate with you, Sean? It seems pretty important, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I also think in a sort of an abstract way, he might mean how good as in how upright or moral or whatever are you, if you consider a couple things. One, if Baelor really does have faith in the gods, like if you're really a good knight, Dunk, then the gods will be on your side for this trial by combat. Are you really a good knight? And also maybe, I don't think it's come yet to the trial of 7, but on some level, if you're really a good knight, will you be able to get other swords to come to your side? I don't think he could have meant that here because that's not happening yet, but you could see how it could also be a factor. Definitely. And yes, Dunk is on both counts. Right?
Yeah. He maybe hasn't proved it to himself yet. I mean,
Yeah.
he hasn't gotten into a fight to the death yet. He certainly is about to, and it works out.
Yeah, I mean, he isn't skilled. He isn't a particularly skilled knight, but he just has such raw talent that it's hard to beat him.
Yeah, like if you're Baelor and you look at him, you're like, I bet he could be good. If he's untrained, he might not be very good, but you could see that, which is like, he might be really good because you see that strength and size. You're like, well, I definitely wouldn't just wave him away. Now, Arlen, like some older guy and is, that doesn't look very physically imposing. You might not be so intimidated by that, but this is you can't just sneeze at a 7-footer, right? And this is something that goes back to the absolute beginning of a Game of Thrones. If you're good at killing, you can get away with a lot. I mean, talk about being ordered to kill a cat. I brought up briefly the question of Micah, right? The butcher's boy. Sandor basically ordered to kill him and does it mostly unquestioningly. But then later, of course, we find out Sandor's somewhat bitter over the whole thing. Maybe not specifically over Micah. He kind of doesn't talk about that too much. But you don't get the feeling that he liked it, even though he has this bravado about it. Because he comes back with all this stuff about how knights are good at killing. That's what makes a knight. That's what makes a knight. He's insistent on it. He thinks the rest is all nonsense. The rest is bull. And if you're good at killing, that's all that matters. Look at how his brother has advanced so high. His brother's the absolute worst at knightly ideals, but because he's good at killing, he's at the top. And so to Sandor, that proves everything. You're like, well, you can see.
Part of that too is not just your physical fighting ability, which is a big factor, but your willingness to do it. I mentioned that before about the idea of who wins a fight is a person who realizes it's really a fight first.
Yeah.
And especially in a lot of these scenarios, sometimes the fight doesn't happen if you know if you know that this person will kill a little kid, they're definitely willing to kill you. Like maybe they won't be able to, but they're going to freaking try. They're not going to, I think about that scene in Unforgiven when Clint Eastwood says, yeah, I'm well money. I've killed women and children and anything that walks and crawls. And now I'm here to kill you.
And that's something that's a really interesting debate amongst the Kingsguard. Like, what type of knight is right for the Kingsguard? Is it someone who's the best fighter? Or is it someone who's the most loyal? Or is it some combination of the two? And that's a fantastic conversation that comes up between Griff and young Griff, which is Griff is not happy that Duck is being added to the Kingsguard because he doesn't think he's a good enough fighter. But young Aegon, I think I kind of agree with young Aegon, saying, yeah, but he'll give his life for me.
I think you need a mix. I think you need a good mix.
Yeah, I agree. I think you need a good mix. If they're just good fighters, but you can't count on them, then what good is that, right? But if they will throw their life away to give you a few minutes to escape, well, that might be worth more than a skilled sword.
I think that you should throw in someone who is just plain honorable, plain a good knight in the sense, a true knight, to, help keep the other knights a little honest.
Yeah, you don't want them to all turn into like the culture of the Kingsguard to be.
Yeah,
like that can be a thing.
I mean, this is all nice to want, but it's hard to find someone that fits all this.
Yeah.
Even if you find someone with all these things, also they have to give up their inheritance.
Yeah, it's a very political thing. There's tons of families that want their kid to be in the Kingsguard, so you're kind of slighting them if their kid is good, almost good enough.
And the whole thing is the Kingsguard are like believed to be the finest knights in the realm. But what makes the finest knight is what we're here discussing. And clearly there is no straightforward basis for that. There is no universally agreed upon definition for what makes the best knight. If you ask Sandor, well, we just explained that. If you ask Brienne, she would not agree with Sandor. She would include the fighting prowess, of course, because that is part of it. You have to have the ability to protect the people you want to protect. But her definition would be more nuanced, for example, even though she's been through so much.
You could even think about, like, even if you try to ignore political aspects or chivalrous aspects, one knight might be really good at jousting, but not that good at swordplay. One vice versa, which is better, what's more important. And even if you ignore all the fighting abilities, think about just discretion. Think about just like keeping quiet about things you hear in court or what you know is going on in a treaty or an alliance or a breaking of one or et cetera,
Some of that, I agree with you, discretion, and I wasn't thinking about that exactly, but some of that is covered under loyalty.
Yeah,
discretion.
true. But you still have to, even if you, I think how to say this, you could be very loyal. You could be a great fighter and be very loyal and very honorable, but not very wise. You could just make mistakes. You could just be incompetent or
yeah, you could not realize
gossipy or something.
You could not realize that something is
how important it is.
Perfect example of that comes in Arianne 2 when she's with these lesser members of the Golden Company, and when she's trying to get information out of them. And one of them is chatty, and she gets, I think Chains is chatty, and she gets some information out of him. And then it's contrasted by when she meets Lysona Mar, and she's like, okay, this is a guy who knows how to keep quiet. This is a guy who knows how to talk without saying anything. This is a guy who's not going to give away any information by accident. So you really, that contrast is really drawn out on the page there. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about here. Okay, let's move on. Daron the Dreamer. We skipped over him before to try to talk about him all at once. I see him as sort of a combination of Tyrion and Rhaegar. His dragon dreams are more frequent and intense than what we've seen from just about anyone. It's not as if there's a lot of examples of dragon dreamers. Certainly there's plenty, but you're generally looking at that from throughout history, there's plenty. There's not like a lot of them around at any given time. And the most famous is probably Daenerys the Dreamer, but we don't really know anything about her personality. Maybe she was also a heavy drinker, somebody that was tormented by the intensity of these dreams. But she wrote them down or maybe dictated them or something, so she certainly seemed to have a little more of a handle on what was going on. Maybe it was more of an outlet for her. But also, very, very more importantly, much more importantly, her dreams were taken seriously. They listened to her. They left Valyria because of her dreams. She foresaw the doom. So that's a pretty big difference. What I mean is that you're validated. This poor Daron guy, he has dreams that come true. No one seems to care. there's no like Makar's like, well, what do you think's going to happen next, son? No, this is a burden on him.
I wonder how much Valyria prized it, understood it, one, and if they did, why did no one else listen to Daenerys? Or did they not? Or did the Targaryens keep this quiet?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I suspect that they didn't put a lot of stock into it, because otherwise, how come none of the other families got out of there they laughed at the Targaryens for leaving. So it seems like this was an exception rather than a normal.
Or it wasn't. I have to wonder, is it possible that not all Valyrian families even have similar abilities?
Yeah, I would guess that's very likely as a possibility. It seems like if all the Dragon Lord families had dragon dreams, I don't know, that seems like a lot.
I mean, yeah, if all the Dragon Lord families had dragon dreams, they would put more stock into it.
Yeah, and you wouldn't only have had one family staying put, I think. I think more families would have left. So I think it's circumstantial, but I think it's pretty strong circumstantial evidence that this was an exception. We also just don't have a lot of other examples of the dreams being taken seriously by too many people through other dreamers, like Daemon II. This is setting up the third story, this Daron's dreams. Like Bloodraven's going to flat out say, well, some Targaryens have dragon dreams, so why not a few Blackfires? They have the same bloodlines. That makes sense, right? But did anyone support Daemon II when he came over? Only the people in Westeros. The rest of the Blackfires didn't support this dreamer guy. Bittersteel didn't support him. So, the long term seems to indicate that most of the time these dreams are not listened to by the people around these dreamers, even when they're a royal. So this is a little unusual. You've got this guy who's rich and powerful, but still, this is still a handicap of some kinds, viewed as a negative. So it's kind of unusual. To
be fair, there are other factors. Like,
sure,
he is also questionable honor and he's alcoholic. So it might be a little easier for them to blow him off. If Baelor was having these dreams, he might have taken him more serious.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Potentially. What I'm getting at is it doesn't seem like they've ever, throughout the centuries, ever tried to make it part of their identity. You'd think that maybe one of these dreamers or two of these dreamers, or some of them wouldn't be someone who's a dishonorable, alcoholic.
Yeah, it makes you wonder maybe what the cause and effect is.
Yeah, like I think,
and maybe makes you wonder if it's the gods playing their games. Like, we'll give you, the alcoholic, you get the special ability.
Yeah,
no one will believe you.
Well, that is
this will create some irony.
That's a really good point, because that is what we're told about the gifts of the old gods, right? It's generally, quote unquote, given to those who have some sort of physical ailment or some sort of already existing condition. So, hey, you're not like, it almost seems like a random connection to be made in a vacuum, but when you line it up like with the old god stuff, it fits quite well. And that's something we're very used to. Seeing something that's true about the old gods thematically also line up on the, the fire and ice things line up a lot of times, I guess is what I'm saying. So, but you're right too, Sean, that there's more to it than just this, though. For example, the Seven Kingdoms are overwhelmingly devout towards the faith, or for worshippers of the faith. So if you have the royal family like listening to dragon dreams, yeah, they're not gonna be cool with that. So I get there's definitely some societal reasons to keep that on the down low. But the other thing I want to get at here is it just doesn't seem like it's very good for your mental health to be able to see the future randomly. Like would sleep really be restful if you're having this happen all the time? And constantly seeing the future but not knowing how to interpret it. Like, he sees Dunk and he's like, oh God, I've seen you in my dreams. And he doesn't know exactly what's going to happen, but something terrible? What do you do? You just like get away from me?
I mean, you can have non-prophetic dreams and your dreams will cause you to not have good sleep and haunt you and be exhausting.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. When they're real, it must be just all the more worse. Yeah. So, it's hard to fathom just how bad that would be. I mean, it's
enough to drive you to drink, maybe.
Yeah. And here's another aspect. We're really getting into sympathy for the Daron here. If he's seeing the future regularly, he is seeing the future regularly. He sees this calamity coming from Dunk. Well, think about this. What's coming in 6 months? The Great Spring Sickness is coming in 6 months. Then there's another rebellion coming in a few years. There's all sorts of Targaryens are going to die. Like, is he seeing this stuff now? Is he dreaming about it now? Is he already seeing his father's death? Is he seeing his own death? Is he seeing, like, how far in advance do these dreams happen? Like, Dany saw the doom 12 years ahead at least. They moved 12 years ahead at least. She had the dreams before that, right? They didn't just wake up the next day. It's like, I had a dream about the doom. Okay, pack up now. No, it's probably a process. Like, okay, I had that dream again. They probably finally believed it. So Daron's quite possibly he's dreaming of the death of his family, the Great Spring Sickness, more rebellions. And think about this. He winds up marrying Valar's wife. Valar, the same kid we see at the end here. Valar's named Hand after his father's death. But of course, he's only Hand for a few months because the sickness gets him. So he marries his cousin's wife. What about when he met her for the first time? Did he have some sort of premonition? Is he dreaming of her like, whoa, I'm gonna marry her someday. That means I know my cousin's gonna die. Like, whoa. Like, it just blows your mind, and none of it's good, right? Ugh.
Yeah.
I don't know how you would deal with this burden. Like, it's pretty constantly shown in media and fiction and fantasy that the ability to see the future is not a good thing.
I've seen people speculate on, like, what POV do you wish you could have had from Song of Ice and Fire or whatever? Daron's might have been a good one.
It would be hard to write, but yeah, it would be very interesting. George would have to make these decisions on which visions to put in there and how to portray them in a dream state. Yeah.
By the way, can I say we got a good thing in the chat about Daenerys?
Yeah.
From a child of Valyria.
Oh, well, she would know.
I can't imagine moving out on a dream of my neighbor's maiden daughter. Like, you're right, dream, and you just
like, how many things did she prove she could foresee before they're like, okay, well, she foresaw that, and that. So, yeah, we better listen. But you'd think that maybe Daron could offer that sort of proof too. But it seems the dreams are too vague for him to know. It almost seems like if you're going to have these visions, they should be more clear, or it's just tormenting to only see like a glimmer, like a brief glimpse behind the curtain.
It may also be that a lot of times he pieces together what the dream was after the event happened. And so if he tries to tell people, they're like, yeah, sure. If he had told them ahead of time, they might have been like, hey, wait a minute. But he might not piece it together until after the fact. So it keeps people from really putting too much stock in it. This might be the first time he's piecing it together ahead of time.
Yeah, I wonder if after this he will put more stock into it and be a little pushier with bringing it up to someone and maybe still get brushed away. You know what I mean?
That's a good point. Yeah, you wonder if he ever, like, I wonder if he's talked to his brother about it much, Aemon, because Aemon's now off and gone. Like, Aemon was gone at a young age. You think that their relationship could have been didn't really have a chance to get going in a way that would have maybe given Daron some relief from all this, some understanding, because Aemon later will express on his own deathbed that, you know, all my brothers dreamed of dragons and it, you know, it tormented them all or whatever. And this is, he means that in a variety of ways. But of course, this is the most literal of that. You know, Egg's dreams of dragons may have been also fantastical, but he literally tried to bring them back with the Summerhall incident. So
a couple more thoughts. One, down the road, Dunk himself might give Aaron's dreams more validity.
Oh, yeah.
Since he knew that one time, yeah, you're right. Which also might make Egg. Additionally, Aaron might, at some point, after having a dream, try to do something to stop it, and it happened anyway. He might have even felt like he caused it by trying to stop it. I can also see that. And Destiny versus Decision is another theme that George plays around with a lot. So I could see that being another reason, like, he stopped trying to tell people or stop it or do something about it. He just,
because it makes it worse.
I just have to accept it.
Wow.
Yeah.
It
might make it worse or make it feel more like I caused it rather than just I knew about it. You know?
That's a very good said right there. I think you're onto something with that, because that also really explains why he just acts like he's helpless. Like he seems like a helpless person. Like, there's nothing I can do. I just drink, and like, even the way he expresses himself sarcastically even is like that. He's like, well, I looked for my brother, but he wasn't in the bottom of my cup, so I didn't find him. Like, he obviously isn't trying, right? And this is a guy who's given up on life, and that really fits well with someone who's just like, well, nothing matters. Anything I do just makes it worse. So yeah, for a man who's given up, I think that's a great theory as to maybe why.
Yeah, I mean, I could see how that would make you a bit of a nihilist, just being like, yeah, fate and destiny are all, I can't change anything in the world. It's all just going to happen. Especially
if he's seen his own death or something like that. I mean, that would just make it even worse. Or like we said, like he sees this great series of deaths coming for his family, and maybe he's amongst it. He can't tell. It's bad. And it reminds us a bit of Rhaegar too, someone who was very burdened by prophecy. Now, and Rhaegar is another character we don't actually know very well. We've seen Daron on screen more than we've seen Rhaegar, so that tells you something right there. Yeah. But Rhaegar was fascinated by Summerhall, perhaps obsessed by it. There's maybe some supernatural element to that. He may have had dreams. He was certainly felt this. He was melancholic. He didn't have a sense of humor. Daron's sense of humor is very sarcastic. He does have a sense of humor, but it's the self-deprecating, cynical type. And so that is a strong parallel. That's why I said Tyrion and Rhaegar. Like Rhaegar, the burden of prophecy, being highborn and not not being capable of some of the things that the world needs from you. And then Tyrion is, of course, that's a little more straightforward. The drinking, the constantly chasing sex workers, the disappointment to your father, the hair that isn't quite the same color as the rest of your family, even. Just lots of little things like that. Of course, the sense of humor too. It really does have a similar sense of humor to Tyrion, doesn't he?
Yeah, I was gonna say you were being really rough on them, real mean, until you brought up the sense of humor. That's one redeeming quality.
Hey, I'm not the one who made the parallels. I'm just pointing to him. But yeah, I think that's important. Like to have this ability, this burden of prophecy, to handle that, you need a strong personality. And it just doesn't seem like maybe Daron just doesn't have it. Now, maybe I'm just not giving him enough credit. It's just that hard to handle. Rhaegar, maybe it's similar. Rhaegar seems like he's a little stronger. He's able to handle this burden more, although it didn't work out for him. So
Melisandre handles it all right.
Yeah, Melisandre. See, that's a good example. Melisandre's someone who handles it pretty well, as far as like the burden of it. Maybe she isn't interpreting.
Yeah, she might not interpret as well. She might make mistakes, but yeah, she hasn't turned to depression and alcohol.
Right, and she is very focused. She's like, nope, save humanity. Right or wrong, there is nobody more focused on it than her. So you got to give her props for that, I think.
And she may have gone more struggle in her youth to gain independence, if you will, whereas Aaron's been coddled, so.
I mean, she also wanted these abilities. They weren't thrust upon her. She had,
She's ambitious, where Aaron doesn't seem to be.
Yeah, well, I mean, she was given away as a slave as a child. I guess it's not entirely clear what she...
Yeah, I don't know how much choice she had in learning to read fires or anything like that. I have to think that you probably had choice in what line of work you went into within the temple and what you were naturally talented at.
And she claims to be one of the best at flame readings.
Yeah, so I feel like that, maybe they just they go through some tests and she just is naturally really good. So they're like, okay, you're going to be a priestess.
Yeah, and it's a very similar concept to what we were just talking about with knights. The knights who rise the highest are the ones who are the best at fighting. Chivalry, that helps. Other things matter, but ultimately it's your skill that really carries the most weight. And that would seem to be true here as well with the red priestesses and priests. So... as well as it is with these princes and princelings and all the rest. Here's another quote about Maekar talking about his disappointment with Daron. It's a little foreshadowy.
I do not need to be reminded of my son's failings, brother. He has only 18 years. He can change. He will change, gods be damned, or I swear I'll see him dead.
We don't know exactly when...
Careful what you wish for.
Yeah, we don't know exactly when Daron died, but it was via STD. Apparently, and he did die before his father. So we don't know whether it was a lot before his father or just a few years, but it was definitely after his father was crowned. But his father ruled for about 12 years, and we're not sure when in that reign it happened. So it's pretty bad. Yeah, that's another thing we talked about. Nina brings it up here as well. Maekar is very intimidating. Like, we compare him to Stannis, and Stannis is pretty intimidating, but I think Maekar is more intimidating. Like, just picture him in that armor, the way his armor is described. It's like one of the most intimidating armor sets I've ever heard of. And it's just boosted by the fact that you know who's wearing it. And Maekar is just so prickly and proud and big, and intense.
I mean, the Amok art where George, told Amok how to draw him shows Maekar as this big, buff, square-jawed man of a king.
Yeah, he's a tank.
Yeah, tank is the right word.
Yeah, so even Aerion is pretty mild and behaving around when his father's around. So it kind of gives you a sense of even Aerion is intimidated by Daddy Maekar here. So that's where you wonder. We don't have a comparison for Stannis there because Stannis doesn't have a son. Stannis, the way he treats Shireen is more like a dutiful. He doesn't have he doesn't really have warmth towards hardly anyone, really. But you got a sense that if Stannis had a son, he'd be real hard on him, don't you think?
Yeah.
He'd be like, no, you got to live up to this and that and this. And Stannis doesn't understand weakness. Like, he wouldn't understand it coming from a child of his body, even less, I would think he would be even less... understanding or nuanced about it. So that's something to think about. What would it be like to have the burden of a guy like that as your dad while also having these dreams and this intensity? I just can't fathom. I'm like, it's hard to feel sorry for a guy with his much privilege, but I do feel pretty sorry for Daron given all this other stuff. There's just, he could have made more of his life, but maybe not. His mental health is just that. You can't make that assumption. I don't know what it's like to have dreams like that. There's not really a...
You should try it and then...
So it's hard to compare.
Yeah, we're gonna stick a lance in you because you said you said you couldn't relate to that either.
Wow.
If you dream about having a lance stuck in you, Aziz, I don't know. You better have a drink.
So, of course, this proceeds now to the recruiting of members for his group of 7. This is pretty neat. It's not a common thing. A little more on this later, but the Laughing Storm says, this is the first trial of 7 in a century. He says, I suspect it's going to become a famous event, or he suspects it will be because of that, which is probably part of why he wants to be involved, because he wants to be, you know, it's a good way to be in the history books. And these nobles are always thinking about things like that. Fame is part of their parlance of what they're looking for. So there was a little more irony here with Stefan Fossaway, wasn't there, Sean?
Yeah, he had told Dunk. I think I've got the quote here. You have one Fossaway, at least the right one.
Not so much.
In the end, maybe he did have the right one.
Yeah, he did. He got the right one. The wrong one was on the other side. Yeah. And it was nice to hear that it seemed like Raymond came out ahead in their fighting, too. He's like, I think I broke some of his ribs. And Raymond himself seemed unhurt. So, all right. He may have been the better knight in both ways, right? The better fighter and the more honorable guy. Win one for the good guys there. So I really wonder, this is a big, big question for me. What drives Baelor to do this? Like, he knows it's risky. He knows it's justified. He knows that Dunk is, at least he's convinced himself based on talking to Dunk. Still, this is, I mean, I don't think he has, I'm not suggesting an ulterior motive. I don't think he's like trying to like get his brother in a position where he can kill him or something. Like, nothing like that. That's not even remotely a possibility in my mind. But what does he have an angle? Is he trying to like think ahead to being king and try to set an example? Is he trying to like get more knights to be like him and be more chivalrous by loudly standing up for someone who can't stand up for themselves? How do you interpret this? It's really interesting.
Real quick, I have one question to add on to that before Sean answers. Is there any chance that he wanted, I mean, I think it's a bunch of those reasons, to be clear. I don't think it's just one reason. But is there any chance part of those reasons was that Daron was in the fight and had to fight, and Baelor didn't really want him killed, and he felt that Arion might actually be happy if Daron was killed?
Well,
rather than trying to kill a brother, he was trying to mitigate the chances of a brother being killed. A cousin, really.
Putting the danger, taking on some of the danger himself. Yeah, I think that's an interesting idea for sure. That could have been in his mind. What do you think, Sean?
Again, there's so many reasons. I gotta believe, especially the little bit we know about Baelor, which is almost all positive.
Yes.
He seems to just be perfect in every way, right? And you gotta imagine he was up all night plotting all the pieces of this together, you know? And so one piece might be, there may be a little bit of a gamble. If I take the other side, that might be enough to get Arion to back down. It might just be done with. As soon as I appear on the other side, he may be like, all right, fine. I didn't know you were that serious about it. Forget the whole thing, right? It's almost giving Arion an out to not have to follow through with this. I kind of wonder if Arion might have been a little scared to fight Dunk in the first place, and that's why he wanted the trial by 7 and not heads up combat. If he's not only afraid to fight Dunk heads up, but also might know that Dunk can't gather 6 other knights, you know. But now that that's happened, Baelor's like, you know, Baelor was not happy about Arion insisting on the trial by 7.
Yes.
He's like, this is a seldom called, it's an ancient thing. We don't normally do this, but technically you have the right, you know. So Baelor's like, well, now that he's done this, you know, what's my next move, you know? And so I could see a million angles of how he looked at this. Some might be very straightforward, like it's the right thing to do. He's just being chivalrous. He might have that same instinct to do the right thing that Dunk and Brienne have. Yeah. It might be a gamble to nip it in the bud before the combat even happens, that maybe Arion will just back down. He probably knew Daron was like looking for an excuse to back down already. You know, he knew Daron wasn't serious about fighting to the death, right?
Yeah.
So he might need to be setting the example. he might want to put Aaron in his place for killing that horse and then attacking a girl. Is like, geez,
Yeah.
I can't fight with him. Like, Dunk's kind of right here, you know.
He doesn't want to be seen to not give justice for that. Like, if he's going to be king, he doesn't want people to be able to do that sort of thing.
Yeah, they can't
attack a woman and just get away with it.
Yeah, they can't associate Baelor with Aerian's actions there.
Yeah.
And in the inverse of what I was saying in terms of Baelor maybe thinking he could mitigate things in the Trial of Seven, I've always wondered if there's any chance that you mentioned Aerian, maybe he was afraid or had some, leeriness there. I've wondered if he chose it because he knew Daron would have to be part of it, and Aerian once Daron is ahead of him in the line of succession. Like Daron should be dead. That I feel like Aerian does have that in his mind. I don't like him, so I don't trust him.
It didn't occur to me, but the more I think about it, I think you're right. I think that is like at least another part of the angle that Aerian can shoot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that way, Aerian is not a kinslayer. He isn't involved at all, but Daron is not a good fighter enough that it's entirely possible that he is killed. Or that Aerian can even be the one to kill him and no one will ever know, but it hasn't been clear enough that Aerian would go that far.
To add on to what you were saying, Sean, as well, the idea that he may have thought there would be someone backing down. He may have thought that just his entering may have changed the picture. Nina suggested a similar thing, and over on Flick, Stefan B had a question for you, Sean. I would like to hear Sean's managing and ruling-oriented thoughts on this. The whole affair was extremely poorly handled by the rulers, in my opinion. The hand of the king dead and risk of 3 Kingsguard and 4 Targaryens coming to harm. 2 of them very important, Baelor and Maekar, over a minor incident between a loose cannon Targaryen and a Hedge Knight. Surely there must have been a better way to resolve this. Of course, there's trial by 7 is part of the law, so that is maybe there isn't a way, but what do you think, Sean? Is that kind of how you see it, or are they kind of trapped by their own honor, or maybe there was another way?
There might have been another way. I have to think for a quick second about this. One of my thoughts is, I don't know if this was necessarily a minor incident. Like, maybe by itself it's a minor incident, but when you add together all the stuff that Aerian's done, maybe it's not as minor. Might not necessarily be minor in the first place, assuming that there is assuming that Baelor believes in chivalry, assuming he wants his family to be honorable. Like, doggone it, Aerian, you can't do this, like, I have to do something about this. Letting this go, this one incident maybe isn't that bad, but it sets a precedent. How many more times does Aerian get to do this without Baelor doing something about it? At some point, it's kind of his role to put this in check, and it may on some level seem minor right now, but as a whole, I feel like he's obliged now. If he is obliged to do something about it, I don't know if like having royal family fight to the death maybe isn't the thing to do, but it is kind of, they are trying to treat this, I don't know quite how to say this, but like by the books. They're like trying to like use whatever laws of the land they have, and this is what is coming. I think it would be worse for Baelor to say, never mind, we're not going to follow the law. You just have to do what I say. That's kind of dictatorial, and I don't think that's his character or a good precedent for him to set. I mean, it's a tough situation, and maybe there's a better way. I can't immediately think of one.
Yeah.
Baelor might have been up all night trying to think of one himself. I don't know.
There's so many things he's trying to balance here. Like Ashaya said, it's hard to get at what Baelor would think is the most important thing, and yeah, we really don't know what's in his head here. Health, yes. Thank you. So we're gonna do a lot of our Tanzel talk will be the beginning of the Sworn Sword, because he thinks about her so much, having not found her. So we've got a few notes on that we'll save for then, but I do want to say it's a kind of a micro tragedy that she leaves before seeing Dunk win. It's like, dang it, he wins. Oh man, she doesn't even get to see that. But you get it, right? You understand why she left when it's laid out for him. He doesn't even he's not like, he's disappointed, but he doesn't think she made a bad decision. She's like, oh yeah, get away while you can.
we can maybe save it more for a later talk with all the other stuff that would surround this, but think how differently the whole story might have played out if she had stayed.
Oh, wow. Yeah. She would have.
Would he have still gone on to be in the Kingsguard? Would he have wanted to marry her? Would he still cared as much about being Dunk's, about Egg being his squire? Or would he have been happy to settle down,
That's a good point. Good point. So you cited a quote here that I think is absolutely worth discussing. Let's go to that.
Okay, yeah. This is when he had gotten the shield from Pate that he wanted 10 soul to paint.
Oh, and by the way, this is the commoners. I wanted to make that note as well. The commoners, they recognize what we're saying here. This is, they all gather around Dunk. They support him.
Yeah.
Because he's what a knight is supposed to be, right? He's doing the thing that knights are supposed to do that so few of them actually do. And because he's such an exception, yeah, that's a great moment.
Now that Dunk held it in his hands, it seemed all wrong. The star was falling. What sort of sigil was that? Would he fall just as fast? And sunset heralds night? I should have stayed with the chalice, he said miserably. It had wings, at least, to fly away. And Sir Arlen said the cup was full of faith and fellowship and good things to drink.
What do you do with all that? That's a powerful quote.
So, one, it kind of shows like his lack of confidence. There's a thing, I don't know enough about it, so I don't want to speak on it too much, but there's something called imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Where the idea is someone, even as expert or experienced they might be at something, they still feel like they haven't earned it or they don't belong or whatever. And sometimes I feel like Dunk might have that. He's almost always looking at himself in a negative light, And additionally, by the way, it's there's a lot to this. This is maybe a moment of him getting out from under Sir Arlen's wings, right? He's got to be his own. He has to accept this is his own sigil. This is his own path. Also, he's not flying away. He never flies away. Like and it almost shows like the Ned quote where, you have to be scared to be brave in the first place. The fact that he considers it makes it better, makes it more valuable or honorable that he does stay time and again. He isn't just completely dumb bumbling into these things. He knows it's dangerous. He knows he's risking his life, but he does it anyway. Side note, another clue here. We keep hinting. I'm trying to save it to the end, but we keep passing these little moments of evidence back and forth about whether Dunk might be a knight.
There's so many.
One of my thoughts is that maybe Arlen was just blind drunk and didn't even remember it the next day, and that and so Dunk doesn't think it counts. And this is his Arlen's cup is a chalice. You know what I mean? Like there's a few hints that Arlen might be alcoholic, and it could give Dunk reason to question the validity of his knighting. But
that's a good point. Yeah, it's interesting. There's like certainly people do tend to frame the question, was he knighted or not? Whereas you're raising the question, was maybe the knighting was incomplete or something was wrong with it, which is what you're saying here. And that's a really good third option.
Yeah.
I think that's very much worth consideration.
Yeah. Not that Dunk just straight up lied about being knighted, that maybe Dunk knows it didn't count, even if it really happened.
Yeah.
And all kinds of reasons he might think it didn't count. Maybe Arlen was drunk. Maybe he knows there's supposed to be a septon there. Maybe Arlen hadn't been honorable in his final days. Maybe, et cetera, et cetera.
Maybe he wakes up and he's like, I didn't knight you. Are you kidding? You're not worthy. Something like that. And he's like, well, you sort of
Dunk's
did,
like,
does he, can he take it back like that? Yeah. Anyway, we're just speculating, but it just goes to show there are other possibilities besides just yes or no here.
Yeah,
a straightforward one. Yeah, I like that. Because I'm not terribly open to it never happened at all, but I like this sort of hybrid concept of something wasn't quite right about it. Maybe the Dunk season is incomplete. That works better for me as an alternative. But maybe one day we'll find out for sure. Also with this falling star, like as a metaphor, a lot of good things come from falling stars, like Dawn, the sword, right? The metal that comes out of it, it founded a house, and it happens like in their fight, Arion swinging his morning star, and the ball comes down on Dunk's head, and it's very symbolic, but Dunk gets back up again. And it reminds me of what Arthur Dayne says to Jaime when Jaime's being knighted. He lays Dawn on his shoulder to knight him, you know, back and forth. But Dawn is so sharp that it cuts him just being laid on his shoulder like that. And Arthur says, all knights bleed. And yeah, this is, to me, Dunk, this is a function of that. Dunk sitting there and questioning whether he's good enough is a function of that. Of all knights bleed, he's considering himself and asking himself whether he's good enough. It's the same thing as sharpening your sword or practicing your strokes. Getting down in the mud and actually fighting is, if we agree that knighthood is part fighting and part behavior, then you better have some self-reflection. You don't necessarily have to ask, oh, am I good enough? It doesn't have to take the exact shape that Dunk's imposter syndrome, I think, is a good thing to use as an example here that you brought up. But the fact that if you're not questioning yourself, like, too much confidence is a bad thing. Too much confidence is arrogance. Like, Arion is pretty arrogant, you know, like the guy just seems very full of himself, you know. A good example of that, perhaps. I mean, obviously it's not just about his confidence. He's also like a psychopath, but hey. Let's take a few questions here. Julie A says, it's proof that Arion is a bully and a coward. By demanding the trial of 7, he would risk 14 lives instead of just 1. Yeah. I think you were right, Sean. I think by demanding a trial by 7 rather than a trial of 1, I don't know that he was afraid of him to face him head on, because he did go right for him in the fight. Although maybe that was just because people were watching. But there's definitely something to the fact that he probably thought there's a good chance that he wouldn't be able to get 7. After all, they tried to they successfully bribed Stefan away. So they were definitely trying to undermine Dunk getting to 7. So there's pretty straightforward evidence of that. So, yeah. I guess Arion wasn't afraid to fight when it came down to it, but he maybe was trying to avoid the fight in the first place. Just that's the way bullies are. They'll use violence, but they prefer to not have it returned.
Yeah,
one-sided.
There's different types and levels of cowardice, and I think Arion isn't a straight-up coward, but he's not a straight-up hero either, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Dornish Dame once, and you got to wonder what Daron the Second thought / did when he was told about this death. Apparently, news went back and forth pretty quickly, because they argued about, there was some debate over the funeral practice, and it was Daron's word to go ahead with the burning. So, yeah. Matthew Dominique says, I do feel like Baelor picking a side is just as much a political scandal than letting Dunk go.
And I wanted to say that I agree with this, but that I wanted to bring it back to what Sean said about it being more dictatorial, about it not necessarily being political, but about not just telling people what to do.
It looks bad out from the outside, kind of like oh, the Targaryens were fighting each other, like, you know, like, what's that all about? Yeah.
You could definitely look at pieces of this and judge them, but what are the alternatives? This is sort of a no good, a lesser of 5 evils, if you will. You know what I mean? Like, all the different ways you could potentially handle this have some problem, and this one, I think, in the end, has maybe on some level has the greatest risk, but also has the least problems. You know, that it doesn't set bad precedents for the future. It maintains the level of honor and integrity for the family, the law, never mind just the right thing or Dunk's character, etc. So
yeah, right on.
And also, for the most part, everyone, I don't know, I say this, risking their lives here is asking for it. They're in on this. They're agreeing to it. No one's being coerced. You know?
That's true. That's true.
I think Daron's a little bit being coerced.
Huh?
I think Daron is honestly
I guess Daron is a little... Dunk kind of is a little bit too.
Yeah,
I guess
true.
the
Two
Kingsguard
people.
too, but hey, you know.
Yeah.
Their whole life is coercion, so. Here's a question from Cece, a.k.a. Mrs. Duncan the Tall. Hi, friends. I'm loving the new Valar Rereadis episodes. Here's a question. At the end of the story, Maekar asks Dunk if his elm tree, gives him any answers. Dunk replies, none that I can hear. Is this perhaps foreshadowing or a nod or some sort of implication that the old gods will communicate to Dunk via werewood, or Bloodraven himself communicate to him. Certainly he's going to have Bloodraven in his life, so you could have the sort of the middleman communicating there. And there's this quote that comes at the beginning of the Sworn Sword, I think it is. Doesn't matter where it is really, but Dunk remembering the first time he met Bloodraven, which is when he was a kid. He saw Bloodraven from afar, and he said he looked like he was looking into his soul. And
by the way, Jimi Hendrix behind me, he's looking into your soul.
It's true. That's true. He is good at that. Jimi Hendrix, rather in honor of the Red Keep, he wrote a song about the Red House. Yes.
There you go.
And so, yeah, this is an interesting question because, yeah, it is. I took note of that quote, too. It's a little, it's an elm tree, not a werewood. But, of course, if it was a werewood, that would all the alarm bells would go off. And what's a werewood doing there? And, let me see its face. And, yeah, that maybe would be a little too obvious. But, yeah, anytime someone asks, are the trees talking? You got to go, wait, what's this all? What's that now? You can't just skip over talking trees in A Song of Ice and Fire or related properties. So, yeah, I do wonder about that, all this connection with Bloodraven and Maekar. I'm not sure we certainly don't have a definitive answer, but yes, I think George is alluding to this as his future, as the whispering of trees is going to matter a lot. Probably more for Egg than Dunk, though, if we're being honest.
Although things that matter for Egg matter for Dunk.
Yeah, it's true. They're really tied together. It's hard to separate them,
yeah.
I guess, in a lot of ways. And of course, we know they're going to go to the wall, right? At some point, that's going to happen. So we'll see about that. That's later. I wanted to cite this comment from YouTube by Feral75 because it very well summarizes the issues facing Dunk and Brienne from a societal angle. So this is a good said from Feral75. It's the inherent sexism which defines chivalry that is Brienne's biggest obstacle. And for Dunk, it's the inherent snobism which comes from the upper classes that also defines chivalry as his obstacle. And both are managing to show to everyone that these two age-old tropes of chivalry are meaningless mummery. Very, very well said.
Snobism, which comes from the upper class, aka classism.
Yes. Yes, good said, yes. So that's awesome. That's really well said, Feral75. It's true. This story not only highlights those aspects of chivalry which maybe aren't chivalrous, they shouldn't belong as part of the definition of chivalry, although they often are lumped in there. And George is showing us that by highlighting that, we really get a sense of, yeah, what the upper class thinks of as chivalry a lot of times involves these sexism and classism, and that's very much defeats the purpose in the first place. Igor P says, my most memorable cheating technique from this tourney is injuring people during practice. Yeah, that's one we didn't mention. That's just we did mention that there's just this assault of little examples of cheating and unchivalrous behavior, just countless examples, and this is one we didn't specifically cite, but that's a pretty good one. Like like looking for an edge. Looking to fight someone when they're weak is not chivalry, right? You're supposed to.
Oh, sorry about that.
Be on equal footing. Oh, Sean was muted.
Yeah, I said it's a good hint at the idea of a tournament night that we see in the third book. The idea that the sort of angles that people have just to win these tournaments, they don't have anything to do with chivalry or even being a good fighter, just like ways to game the system.
Yeah,
which. I even understand. I understand it makes sense to try to find edges, but it maybe doesn't make sense for a chivalrous knight to try to find those edges, or maybe they need to have better rules for the tournament. I don't know. But
yeah. Andrew Lim calls back our example of dragonflies. When I was stationed in Korea, we used to have competitions to see who could get a dragonfly to catch the biggest pebble. Some of the dragonflies were big enough to grab and momentarily hold pebbles twice the size of a pea. They are wonderful insects. Whoa. Dragonflies catching pebbles? That's wild. I didn't know that was a thing. Learn something new every day, I suppose.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Thanks for that, Andrew Lim. Dragonflies are pretty amazing. I mean, it makes sense that they'd be amazing in a lot of ways. Like human evolution didn't start as long ago as dragonfly evolution. They've been evolving for, 60 million more years than us, something like that. So, yeah, they're impressive. Kevison says, on the subject of the Laughing Storm knocking off pieces of his opponent's armor and tossing them to the crowd, a victor in a tourney or melee wins his defeated horse and armor, so he really is giving away part of his winnings to the commons, which I would argue is chivalrous. Yeah, it is sort of a gray area. Now, to be fair, yeah, we even called it Robin Hooding their helmets at the time when we brought this up. But the understanding between defeated opponents is that you'll get to buy your stuff back. Like, they generally sell it back. Like, you almost always sell it back to the person you beat. You take the money and let them have their stuff. Because their stuff is customized. It's personal. It's their size.
It's the understanding.
Right.
But it's not the rule.
Right. So that's the argument. Is it chivalrous to not go by this understood rule? Like, it's definitely chivalrous to give money to charity, I would say. But is it chivalrous to divert that from... Like, he could just get the money and give it to them. He doesn't have to give them... You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's not like this is his only way to give money to charity here.
Yeah, it's
He's
selfish.
skirting the line.
It's selfish.
Yeah.
It just straight up is. He wants the, people applauding him. He
It's
wants
show-
the
yeah, it's
pageantry of it all. It's showy. Yeah, I don't really think that it's like he wants to help the common people.
He wants the approbation. Yeah, he wants the cheers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think he cares about helping.
I do want to give him a little benefit of the doubt because later on, when Baelor's presenting his plan of fighting, like, I'll take the King's Guards because they can't attack me anyway. He's the one that says, "Is that chivalrous?"
Yeah, it's a good point.
I don't know about that.
That's a good point. He seems
to be mindful of it at least.
That's exactly where I was going. What I was going to say. He seems to care whether or not this act is actually chivalrous is debatable, but he might see it as that, and he maybe is a chivalrous guy in general.
If he got into an intellectual debate with someone, he might like reevaluate and stop doing it,
Yeah,
but
maybe not. He might just be like, nah, I'm going to keep doing it. It's gray area, whatever. Who knows? They're
lucky I didn't take their heads off with their helmets.
Julie A asks, question for the panel: is Jon having dragon dreams? I don't think so. I don't think any of his dreams have been explicitly dragony. Like, he doesn't have dreams of specific dragons. He has dreams that you could say have, like, flame and fire in them and stuff like that. But most of his dreams are of, like, the crypts. He has a few skin-changing dreams. I would say magic dreams, yes. Dragon dreams, specifically, no. If that's actually a category.
I think I concur.
Okay, cool. Anything to add, Ashaya?
I concur. I would be a fool if I did not concur.
Should have concurred. Why didn't I just concur?
Just concur. That's a reference to Catch Me If You Can, y'all. If you haven't seen that movie, very fun, very fun. By the way, it's supposedly based on a true story. It's not. Almost.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's not. I read this whole takedown on it. Frank, most of what is in the movie was never independently verified. Abagnale tells this story and wrote a book about it, but people just didn't question it. But people who have questioned it, yeah, it's almost all bull. It's too bad because
it's like maybe based on a true story, but it's highly embellished. It's practically not
massively
true.
embellished. Yeah, like for example, he really massively harassed that family in Louisiana, and he didn't ever escape from the plane. Like, a lot of these other things just didn't happen, and yeah, he downplayed how bad he was, and upplayed how clever he was. So yeah. And also the bigger issue is that so much of this happened in a pre-internet era when people just couldn't question, like, things couldn't be questioned, and no one's now only a few people have gone back to check here in the year 2021. So anyway, quite a tangent there, folks. Let's get back to it. I want to shout out our friends over at Shire Post Mint. They're doing a fantastic job making coins of all stripes, A Song of Ice and Fire coins, but also other types of coins from different fandoms. Really high quality. You get stuff of that looks like it's straight from some dragon's hoard, but without the grime that you might associate with sitting under a dragon for a century.
Next time you talk about Shire Post, we need to grab our bag of coins and you need to, like, shake it in front of the microphone for some ASMR for everyone.
I'll jingle my sack in front of the
God.
Yeah, I think I got they're probably in storage from when I moved here to Denver from Atlanta, but I think I got quite a few of them from Steven Stark. I think he gave me a selection of those coins. The first that I became aware of them.
Yeah, those the Bravosi iron coin is probably their most popular seller among the A Song of Ice and Fire coins. That's a really good one. There's a lot of versions of it though. There's like a square version and just a lot of like some variations on the artwork and stuff like that. So yeah.
Well, there's like the Faceless Man coin versus, the Bravosi.
Right,
coin.
that's true. There's a couple of alternates.
But if you want to buy some for yourself or for a friend or loved one, if you go to our website on the sidebar to the right, you'll see a direct link. And if you buy through that link, it will help support us.
Most of the purchases I've made of Shire Postman were for gifts for someone else. It's a really easy way to just be like, ooh, a gift for someone, and there's so many of them you don't have to ever repeat.
But yeah, Aziz also has some cool, historical ones. They don't just have fantasy.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about the plan. As you said, Sean, you already mentioned this quote from Lionel. The gods will let us know. We've talked about how the gods don't have any powers, the seven, but maybe they do. They didn't seem to be happy with this trick, if Baelor's death is any clue.
Yeah. It depends on what the gods were letting them know exactly. By the way, that's one of my favorite lines of the whole series was when Baelor says, the gods will let us know. I like it because you can't really argue against it, because all the people that ostensibly believe in the gods is like, all right, well, if you believe in the gods, here we go. Like, how can you argue against? It's like this sort of excuse, but also maybe he really does believe in a god. Yeah. It's so many angles to it that it seems like it's a good plan. And if there is a problem with it, look, we're already putting our lives in God's hands anyway.
Yeah.
So
at
least we're going to do it in a way that seems wisest. And if the gods don't like it, they'll let us know. So
that's a good said right there for sure. He's probably devout. And I think there's a really strong argument that he is legitimately devout and not just saying this. After all, he's the son of Daron the Good, who idolized Baelor the Blessed, the so-called Septon King. So, I mean, he's got a direct line to... I mean, he's named after Baelor the Blessed. That's so. Absolutely, this guy was given a religious upbringing. His family, he was brought up amongst people that are devout believers that have serious faith is a big part of their life. So yes, we have to reckon with that as part of his attitude, part of his character. I think it would be a mistake not to.
Something that prayer is, religion aside, even if you're a straight atheist, there still is something, prayer still has these, I think, at least two purposes that it serves. You reflect on what you're thankful for. A lot of your prayers are, thank you, God, for this, whatever. And I think that's a valuable thing. And the other is to think about what you want, like, please let my cousin be cured of cancer, or let me get this job, or whatever. Those are things that prayer do, whether or not you believe in the gods. And so whether there are real gods, whether Baelor believed them or not, you got to imagine he probably prayed on this. And part of his prayer was, what do I want to happen here? How do I make that happen? Okay, I got a plan. The gods will let us know.
Yeah, well said. So this is a couple of things about jousting here, about whether this, like the legitimacy of this trick, and just a couple of things that are useful to know. So first of all, they talk about breaking a lance is honorable. When Baelor says breaking in a tournament, breaking a lance is honorable, but here it might be the difference between life and death. Okay, the reason breaking a lance is honorable is because it means you scored a clean hit. The lances are designed to break. Tournament lances are designed to break, but they're designed to break in a manner commensurate with this would have been a fatal blow or a strong blow, if not for this breakability put into the lance. So in other words, they're only designed to break when you strike a really good blow, or if it just bends backwards or something like that. Obvious.
You need to have good skill to aim it well, right?
Yes.
But if your aim is at the horse or their head, you're not going to break the lance. You're going to break their head or kill their horse. Right. So it's honorable to have enough skill that you could have hit their head, but to hit their shield so that your lance breaks. It's like, yeah, it's what the goal is in a tournament.
So think about a bunch of your friends, like any of your friends who are gamers. Maybe you're a gamer too. You talk about your favorite game, like your or whatever game you guys are playing right now. Or some game that you've been playing for a long time. Maybe you have friends who like to discuss battles, or real historical battles. Picture this with these guys who go to tournaments all the time, who joust a lot. They probably have thought about a lot of the tactics and strategies, and A trial by 7, though, would be something that none of them have ever participated in. So they probably have thoughts on like the right strategy for a 7-on-7 and things like that. This is what like jousting nerds, right? Like there's these knights that think about jousting strategy. Baelor quite possibly has had this idea for a long time. He's like, you know what? This is that time to try that, you know? Just thinking about reach. Because I wonder if he had this idea just now, like he was praying, like he was up all night thinking about it, and this is one of the things that came to him, and he considers it like a inspiration from the gods, like the father sent him, you know, some inspiration or something like that. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. I wonder how much they thought about this. We think about like how much of a question of politics is here, but probably quite a bit of just tactics has been discussed or at least hashed out. That's kind of things these nobles talk about. We talk about fighting all the time, right? Like,
yeah, it's another thing that sometimes, for better or worse, tradition can seep its way into a lot of things, but into war. You know, even like in colonial times, it was standard for the armies to like schedule a meeting. All right, 9 o'clock on this field, we're going to meet up and then shoot at each other until more people die on one side or the other, whatever. And it was kind of like, what do these Americans do? And running into the trees, you know, these sort of guerrilla tactics. But Americans weren't as attached to the traditions. We're just trying to win this battle, you know? And so I can imagine over time, tradition arose like, this is how you make a war lance. And it just made them all the same. But if someone's like, well, what if I make mine a little bit longer? You know, like maybe it's more likely to break, but I'm more likely to knock them off their horse first. But people aren't actively thinking about that mostly. But Baelor thought of that. So
yeah, you touched on a lot of important concepts there. One of them is that early on in early warfare, that's exactly what happened. They agreed to fight at a certain place and time. Sometimes it was just one-on-one. It was like a trial by combat. Sometimes it was just like 40 dudes versus 40 dudes. So this trial of 7 is reflective of something that was true in ancient times, and they didn't involve the peasants. That's what happened a lot of times. They just didn't involve the peasants at all. It was just the nobles gathering and fighting and hashing out their problems. It was a later advancement of, quote, I guess you could say actually it was more of a sliding backwards of
a regression.
Yeah, a regression of adding in the peasants and making them fight too. And that's part of that came from these, when you have a powerful nation that can go up against a powerful nation, what you do is you attack their castle, you attack their base. But the problem is you get these baron level nobles who are permitted to fight. They're permitted to conduct private wars. That the Cursed Kings series, which we've cited a bajillion times, is an example of a king who tried to stop that. He's like, no more private wars. Aegon V, this egg, tried to do the same thing. He's like, stop it with the private wars, y'all. Enough of that. And one of the reasons is, historically speaking, the private wars can be so much more destructive than the big ones, which is oddly unintuitive, but it's true. The reason is, think about this. I'm a baron. I got 500 men. You're a baron. You got 500 men. 500 men is not enough for me to take your castle. 500 men is not enough for you to take my castle. So what do? We attack each other's weaker spots. I attack your village. You attack my village. I attack your village. And so the peasants just pay the price because they become the targets because these guys literally can't attack each other's bases. And this went on for hundreds of years. In a variety of cultures and places, but this is what I'm describing is mostly medieval and earlier.
You also get a greater concentration of people dying in one little area, where if the larger, you know, the levels up and the feudal system lords declare war, this village might have had to give up 20 men to go fight in some war, and all the villages give up 20, and they all go off and they fight in some war, and you get 3,000 people raised. But if these villages fight each other, all 200 of the men go fight all 200 of the other men. They all end up killing each other, and 2 villages are completely wiped out instead of a little piece of a bunch of villages being wiped out.
Yeah, it's totally true. And you see that even in modern war. Sometimes you would have, because I think you alluded to this a long time ago. You'll occasionally have units that are formed from one town.
The 82nd Airborne Division is called the All-American Airborne Division because it was the first one that had a soldier from every state. This is like, the early 1900s. The American Army was still fundamentally going up into World War II every soldier in a unit was just all from some town in North Carolina or all from some town in Wisconsin or whatever. It was a relatively modern war that you started to have people from enough different areas mixed together in army units.
Yeah. So one last thing about lances. They did start off basically as just spears on horseback. It's kind of a misunderstanding that knights fight with their swords a lot. They don't really. So the sword was like your plan B weapon when you were a knight fighting other knights. A sword is a fantastic weapon against unarmored folk. But if you're fighting against someone in heavy armor, a sword isn't that great, especially compared to other things. And the sword was often used more like a spear or a mace when fighting an armored opponent. Your three main knightly weapons were the spear / lance, then the poleaxe, and then the dagger. The dagger was more important than the sword because the dagger is what you use when you're wrestling, like which we see Dunk get involved in multiple times. That's when he's at his best because of his size. So basically over the years, there's just a bajillion versions of lance, war lance, jousting lance, this and that. At first, they were just lances. The jousting lance was a advancement because of these tournaments that weren't meant to be killing each other, although they were clearly still deadly. And they invented something called the coronel tip. The coronel tip is like a tripod almost, and it's designed for unhorsing rather than putting all the force of the horse and the rider into that tip, which would kill, obviously. So in a tournament, you change instead of that point, you have a brace, which is better for shoving. So there you go. That's why. So these lances would have had those coronel tips most likely, which was like, yeah, they're better at unhorsing, which they really would be better at unhorsing because they're designed for that. Whereas in a war situation, unhorsing is nice, but you really just want to kill them.
Yeah.
Getting them off the horse is great, but they can get up and still fight once they're off their horse. So let's go to the actual trial. Something that strikes me here very majorly in this somewhat extended quote is just how much Ice and Fire, Others and Dragons theme work is being done here. It's really quite epic. Let's have it.
A roar went up from the crowd. At the north end of the meadow, a column of knights came trotting out of the river mist. The 3 Kingsguard came first, like ghosts in their gleaming white enamel armor, long white cloaks trailing behind them. Even their shields were white, blank and clean as a field of new-fallen snow. Behind rode Prince Maekar and his sons. Arion was mounted on a dapple gray, orange, and red flickering through the slashes in the horse's caparison at each stride. His brother's destrier was a smaller bay, armored in overlapping black and gold scales. A green silk plume trailed from Daron's helm. It was their father who made the most fearsome appearance, however. Black curved dragon teeth ran across his shoulders, along the crest of his helm and down his back, and the huge spiked mace strapped to his saddle was as deadly-looking a weapon as any Dunk had ever seen.
Whew. That's what I was saying when I talk about Maekar looking intimidating. I mean, picture that. That is just, whew, goodness.
I remember when I was a kid, I don't know, kind of probably most kids go through a phase where kind of enamored with knights and medieval kind of culture and combat and swords and such. And I remember thinking that a ball and chain, I was like, ugh, man, that's it. I don't know. For some reason in my mind, it was like more real. That would just smash someone's skull in.
Yeah.
It was more dangerous or scary to me than a sword or whatever else.
Yeah, well, you're not wrong. Apparently, that's the mace didn't really become a thing until armor became a thing. I mean, back in the day, people would fight with clubs and spears. Clubs became less effective when people developed basic
helmets,
armor and stuff, but then so this was an answer to that. It's like, what if we make the ball heavy and spiked and fully metal and all that? Yep, almost every piece of armor or every weapon is an answer to a previous armor or weapon that gets used regularly. That's the history of warfare is just a history of building something that defeats the last tool your enemies were using. Rock, paper, scissors. A lot of times it is.
Yeah.
Like you go from, this armor is to wear the proper armor, you get too slow. Okay, well, what if we don't wear any armor? And like, then now we're going to change weapons to fight against people that don't wear armor. And yeah, it's very cultural.
Rock, paper, scissors turns into knife, gun, nuke.
Yeah.
Eventually.
So what we have here, though, the portrayal, the theme work, the symbolism here is very heavy. You got 3 dragons, Maekar, Arion, and Daron. The dragon with 3 heads, and then you have 3 Kingsguard in all white. So ghost shadows, they're portrayed as pure white, snow and ghost. Those words are both used. Then you have the dragons with all their colors and teeth, and it's just over the top awesome. And of course, there's also Stefan Fossaway. So 3 dragons, 3 white ghosts, and an apple. Not exactly sure how you fit that in there.
By the way, it didn't occur to me allusion to the death of those dragons, that the ghosts are accompanying them.
Yeah, good call. And who are they lining up to fight? It's a coalition united by a common goal. Dunk's side is like mankind, all of humanity facing these huge supernatural challenges of the twin supernatural challenges of ice and fire. We got to face the dragons. We got to face the others. And is it going to be enough? Are we enough? Well, you want
the dragons, the others, and the apple.
Yeah. Apple, what is he doing in there? Well, they needed a 7th, so you got to have that guy. Well, he represents the humans that take the side of evil, the ones who don't stand with their fellows. I'm making this up as I go along, but there's definitely something there. The apple as a symbol of being tempted, right? By
well, that's actually really good.
Adam and Eve, because he was tempted by the dragon with rewards to be made a lord. It didn't work out, but hey. Yeah, that might be it. I mean, we're actually talking about the faith and the 7, which, that is the closest to real world Catholicism or what have you, other versions of Christianity, if you prefer. So let's talk about the fight itself. Here's a quote about him kind of struggling to get it going in the fight. And it's very meaningful. Like, this is, the action itself is interesting. It's gripping, but George, once again, he does so much with how he describes the action that you can make connections to elsewhere, and you can really feel for the struggle. Like, you really feel for Dunk's imposter syndrome here, because that's what's happening, right? He's losing, but he's not like, oh my God, I'm dying. Oh my God, woe is me. No, he's like, I've failed. He's worried about the people that were counting on him, and you just like to see that. Let's have the quote.
His long sword went spinning from his grasp, and the ground rose up to meet him. He landed with a bruising impact that jarred him to the bone. Pain stabbed through him so sharp he sobbed. For a moment, it was all he could do to lie there. The taste of blood filled his mouth. Dunk the Lunk thought it could be a night. He knew he had to find his feet again or die.
So he does find his feet again, but then, he gets smashed. It's actually, I have these lines out of order. The spiked ball whirled round and round the sky and fell towards his head as fast as a shooting star, which is a callback to him like, oh, the shooting star goes down. That's bad. And he's like, am
I going to fall as fast?
And then indeed, the quote, he starts like this.
He broke my head and I'm dying. What was worse was the others who would die with him. Raymond and Prince Baelor and the rest. I failed them. I'm no champion. I'm not even a hedge knight. I'm nothing. He remembered Prince Daron boasting that no one could lie insensible in the mud as well as he did. He never saw Dunk the Lunk, though, did he? The shame was worse than the pain.
Yeah, the shame was worse than the pain. And he just said he broke his head. I mean, he was just whacked by a spiked morning star, for God's sake. He's just in horrible pain. He's already had a lance. This is past the point where he's yanked the lance out of his side. But the shame is worse than the pain. This is a man who has a humongous heart. But here's where we get a parallel to perhaps the most famous duel in all of A Song of Ice and Fire. Also a trial by combat, though, with only 1-on-1, not 7-on-7. And that is, well, let's see if you can guess as we are reading the quote. First, the Dunk and Egg quote.
He rolled into Arion's legs, threw a steel-clad arm around his thigh, dragged him cursing into the mud, and rolled on top of him.
Okay, so at this point, when you're a huge man, and he's wounded, so it's not definitely over, but at this point, Dunk's probably going to win. Almost certainly. Huge guy on top of small guy, you know, as close as possible. That's what Dunk maybe should have been aiming for all along, to get into a spot like this, because this is, as he knows, he's good at this kind of fighting. He's already skilled at it because it's part of his upbringing, but his size and strength make him just overwhelmingly talented at it too. So if you haven't figured out, well, here's the quote that this lines up with quite nicely.
Clegane's hand shot up and grabbed the Dornishman behind the knee. The Red Viper brought down the greatsword in a wild slash, but he was off balance, and the edge did no more than put another dent in the mountain's vambrace. Then the sword was forgotten as Gregor's hand tightened and twisted, yanking the Dornishman down on top of him. They wrestled in the dust and blood, the broken spear wobbling back and forth. Tyrion saw with horror that the mountain had wrapped one huge arm around the prince, drawing him tight against his chest like a lover.
And at that point, it was over, right? I mean, there was once...
Yeah.
Oberyn...
The huge advantage swung the other way.
Yeah, right? That's like he used his spear, his reach. He did all these things to keep Gregor's size and strength muted. But then he got cocky. He got close. He taunted him. Thought it was over, but it wasn't. And that's exactly what happened here. Aerion was like, oh, I've got you. It's over. You know, beg for mercy. He's trying to get him to talk. It's exactly what the Red Viper's doing. He's like, admit your guilt, you know, and then I'll kill you. And this is exactly the same. Like, yeah, admit that you're a loser, and maybe I'll only take your hand, and maybe we'll leave your foot. You know, it's just the same kind of gloating. He's not after justice here, unlike the Red Viper. There's, you know, you're not rooting for the guy on the ground in that case. You're not rooting for the mountain, but the physical similarities in the fights here are just unmistakable once you point them out.
What's he start doing? He starts monologuing.
Yes. Never start monologuing in a fight. Even when your opponent's down and poisoned and you've pinned him to the ground with the spear, just to make sure he's dead when he's 8 feet tall. And yeah. So, but this is another parallel we have here. I like to bring this one up. Nina cited this one. This has been a long time coming, us talking about Brienne and Dunk, but oddly enough, this is the first thing we see from Brienne. So this is a nice long quote, but we're going to enjoy ourselves dissecting it afterwards.
The white horse and the black one wheeled like lovers at a harvest dance, the riders throwing steel in place of kisses. Long axe flashed and Morning Star whirled. Both weapons were blunted, yet they still raised an awful clangor. Shieldless, the Blue Knight was getting much the worse of it. Soloris rained down blows on his head and shoulders to shouts of "Highgarden" from the throng. The other gave answer with his Morning Star, but whenever the ball came crashing in, Soloris interposed his battered green shield, emblazoned with 3 golden roses. When the Long Knights caught the Blue Knight's hand on the backswing and sent the Morning Star flying from his grasp, the crowd screamed like a rutting beast. The Knight of Flowers raised his axe for the final blow. The Blue Knight charged into it. The stallions slammed together. The blunted axe head smashed against the scarred blue breastplate. But somehow the Blue Knight had the haft locked between still gauntleted fingers. He wrenched it from Soloris' hand, and suddenly the two were grappling mount to mount, and an instant later they were falling as their horses pulled apart. They crashed to the ground with bone-jarring force. Loras Tyrell on the bottom took the brunt of the impact. The Blue Knight pulled a long dirk free and flicked open Tyrell's visor. The roar of the crowd was too loud for Catelyn to hear what Soloris said, but she saw the words from his split, bloody lips: yield.
So compare that to, scroll down, Sean. We've got the end of Aerion's end of the duel here, and it's very similar.
A visor is a weak point, he remembers Steely Pate saying. The prince had all but ceased to struggle. His eyes were purple and full of terror. Dunk had a sudden urge to grab one and pop it like a grape between 2 steel fingers, but that would not be knightly. Yield, he shouted. I yield, the dragon whispered, pale lips barely moving.
So that was, those two fights spliced together is also going to, like a triumvirate of fights, because Dunk versus Lucas Longinch in the next story is very similar. It's the same thing where he loses his weapon and then charges forward and wins because he can out-grapple the other guy. Now, that's a tougher grappling because Long Inch is huge. But here, it's over really quickly because Loras is more like the Red Viper versus the Mountain in this case, where he's great at a distance. He's an amazing fighter. But once he gets in close combat with someone twice his size, well, all his advantages are gone. I noticed, too, Dunk talking about the urge to pop his eye, which, of course, given we were just talking about the Red Viper in the Mountain, well, someone did not have any qualms about doing that. He didn't care about it seeming
He was not very knightly either.
He was not very knightly. Nor was yelling out about how he did those things to his family. Yeah.
That's right, I'm not a knight, and I'm going to keep not being a knight.
Yeah. Also, this is a nice little setup for, we've got Arion down in the mud, all brown, which is, you know, we're going to have that 2 stories from now when the brown dragon, you know, they mocking him for that. So it's a brown dragon before the browner dragon. We also even have similar weapons at use there, like the Morning Star being used by Loras versus the Morning Star being used by Arion here. And of course, the flicking of the visor open with the dagger. That is a similar aspect as well. Also, when he's getting ready to joust, he thinks to himself, my lance is part of my arm. All I have to do is reach out and touch him with my one long finger. Which, hey, folks, did you think of Sirio saying the sword is part of your arm? You cannot drop your arm. So,
good call.
Yeah, that gave me good feels thinking about Sirio there. Oh, here's a fun line. Sean, why don't you read this one?
He pressed. Is that the one?
Yeah.
He pressed his heels down, tightening his legs with all his strength and letting his body become part of the motion of the horse beneath. I am thunder, and thunder is me. We are one, and we are one beast. We are joined. We are one.
So he became a centaur. Right there. Yeah.
Which centaurs always make me think of that Saturday Night Live skit with Christopher Walken doing the interview. Remember that?
Oh.
Someone comes in for the interview and it's a centaur. And everyone's being normal at first. And Christopher Walken's like, so I'm looking at your resume. How long were you at your last job? Are you attracted to horses or women? And the centaur's like, can we just keep the interview to my job qualifications? Like, oh, sure, of course. But if you saw the rear end of a horse and didn't know if it was a horse or a centaur, would you be attracted? Like, can we just stick to my qualifications? Like, yeah, but just tell me what. And he's like, I don't know. I guess I'd be attracted. It was a horse. It was a horse.
A few other historical quotes here. More parallels. George showing consistency within his world building. We, of course, love to draw attention to these things. So here's a series of quotes that work together, starting with another quote from Oberyn Martell.
In the days of the Targaryens, a man who struck one of the blood royal would lose a hand he struck him with, observed the Red Viper of Dorne.
And what does Baelor Breakspear say here?
The last time a man was found guilty of striking one of royal blood, it was decreed that he should lose the offending hand.
Roose Bolton also not a big fan of hands, I guess.
Roose Bolton reached down, snapped the cord, and flung the hand at Hote. Take this away. The sight of it offends me.
An offending hand. That hand was already struck off, but so
Jaime hadn't struck any royal blood. There was no justification for that.
Are you sure? He killed Aerys with that hand.
Oh, you're right. Never mind. Yeah, he should have had his hand.
It was a long delayed punishment. It was 17 years later or 18 years later. Yep. What's funny is I actually didn't think of that when I wrote this quote here. I was like, oh yeah, he really did strike. He struck him pretty roughly there, didn't he? Aegon the Force had he tried to invade Dorne. Like so many Targaryen kings, he tried to invade Dorne. Unlike most of them, he was even weaker. His was probably the worst attempt of all of them. He actually built dragons of wood and tried to roll them into Dorne through those hard mountain passes. And these things were like meant to shoot wildfire? Yes, you heard that right. Wooden dragons that shoot wildfire. He wanted to roll these through the mountain passes of Dorne towards the end. Yeah, it didn't work out very well. But when you see Tancel's wooden dragons in the puppet show, it might be a little something else for them to be upset about, like the being mocked over this ridiculous attempt. I mean, fair play on mocking that, right? But still. Okay, so remember when this story was written, The Clash of Kings, right around the same time. So here's another little George filling it all out at once. Quote.
It's Arion the Monstrous.
Well, the one above it first. Yeah. Prince Daron.
Prince Daron gave a weary shrug. Egg has the truth of it. Arian's quite the monster. He thinks he's a dragon in human form, you know. That's why he is so wroth at that puppet show.
And then here, Jon's first chapter in A Clash of Kings.
Arion the Monstrous? Jon knew that name. The prince who thought he was a dragon was one of Old Nan's most gruesome tales. His little brother Bran had loved it.
Of course, this is the guy.
It reminds me.
Yeah, go ahead.
It reminds me of when Daron says, "Too bad he wasn't born a fossil way." Then we
True that.
We'd all have a lot less to worry about if he thought he was an apple.
True that. True that. So this is the first trial of 7 in a century, according to the Laughing Storm. You know, of course, that we would be on point with telling you about that, but we don't know what that one was. The only other trial of 7 we know of is from Maegor the Cruel, and he fought a group of the warrior sons. Now, Baelor, pretty much the opposite of Maegor. Maegor kind of pretty much an opposite to Dunk as well, although maybe through the transitive property, Maegor is a lot like Gregor. The parallels we've shown between those two are overwhelming. And of course, as a mirror image, like Baelor is a mirror, the opposite of Maegor in a lot of ways. Well, here you go. Dunk being the opposite of Gregor is something that we've come back to many times. So these things sort of fit together. Now, Maegor had been stripped of his position of Hand of the King after taking a second wife without permission and refusing to undo it. So he went into exile, and when he came back upon his brother's death, he's like, "I'm the king now." And some other folk were like, "Are you?" And well, they fought this trial of 7 over that question. So talk about the opposite of like political importance on the surface here. You've got a hedge knight being a true knight, rounding out his 7 with Baelor Breakspear. Instead, we have the usurper, Maegor the Cruel, who had been the youngest knight in the realm. So very, very openly a knight and deserving of it in terms of his martial prowess and very undeserving of it in terms of his personality. Maegor was challenged over his right to rule, so the stakes could not have been higher. Instead of the life of a hedge knight, you've got the actual throne, right? He's having a trial by 7 to take the throne away from these warriors' sons who are arguing he doesn't have the right. Like Baelor, Maegor doesn't have the Kingsguard on hand to fight with him. He basically came back from exile, stopped on Dragonstone, got crowned, and then flew to King's Landing to claim the crown. So the Kingsguard, they weren't, what are they going to do, ride on the back of his dragon with him? So this is pretty cool. Here's another quote. This should ring familiar, kind of like our lead into the Red Viper quote. This should be very familiar, and it's very cool. Sean, please take it away.
Well, I'm not sure which quote you're at.
The king turned to the crowd.
Oh, I see here. The king turned to the crowd. "Who will come and stand beside his king?" he called. Many turned away in fear or pretended that they did not hear, for the prowess of the warrior's son was known to all. But at last, one man offered himself. No knight, but a simple man-at-arms who called himself Dick Bean.
"I've been a king's man since I was a boy," he said. "I mean to die a king's man."
I've been to death.
I love that.
Continue.
Pun intended.
Yeah. Go on, Sean.
Only then did the first knight step forward. "This bean shames us all," he shouted. "Are there no true knights here? No leal men?" The speaker was Bernard Brune, the squire who had slain Heron the Red and been knighted by King Aenys himself. His scorn drove the others to offer their swords.
So instead of a bean, we got an egg, I suppose. I don't know. Yeah, but this is very similar, right, to are there no true knights among you? It's very, like, no one actually comes forward except for Baelor in that case. But here it works because it's kind of the reverse. It's the Hedge Knight is the one stepping forward to defend the king rather than the Hedge Knight asking for help against the royal family. So you can kind of, the politics of the situation are pretty straightforward in terms of how it plays out. But in terms of standing as a mirror image / parallel or as an example of this, it's quite similar in a lot of ways, and I think it's pretty neat. Of course, it's much bloodier. Maegor, of those 14, only Maegor survived in his battle, whereas here, none of the guys on the losing side actually die. 3 guys on the winning side die, and no one on the losing side, so that's kind of odd, but hey, that's what happens. Now, we have also, even the ending point has sort of a reverse to it. Now, what happens with Baelor? He's like, he looks like he's fine. Maybe there's a little clue something's wrong because his speech is slurring, but he doesn't die till the helmet comes off, right? Well, check this out. What happens to Maegor right here? Quote.
Even as he, wait, is this the right one? Even as he fell, Sir William dealt the king a terrible blow to the head, cracked his helm, and left him insensate. Many thought Maegor dead until his mother removed his broken helm.
So this Maegor was dead until they removed his helm, whereas Baelor is alive until they remove his helm. One thing I also wonder about
real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
The Baelor scene where his just brain falls out is the most disturbing and visceral scene in all the books to me.
Really?
Like, I see it the most clearly. Next to Oberyn getting his head exploded. And that was on TV, so I, have a visual there. And here I don't even have a strong visual from anything except I can, like, hear it in my head, like the squelch of it plopping down. Yeah.
Have you been exposed to any zombies? You're not craving this brain, are you?
well, that's a great segue to a topic that's almost next. So we'll just jump ahead to it. But before we do that, I wonder about this Trial of 7 thing. Like, most of the major events in A Song of Ice and Fire history, especially the ones that happen more than once, are setups for it to happen during A Song of Ice and Fire. Is there going to be a trial by 7?
We got that question from Julia A. Asked, what scenarios are likely to have one? And obviously the ones you immediately would think of are Cersei, Marjorie. Who else would be on a trial? I don't know. We have attorney happening up where Sansa is.
Yeah, the Kearney of the Winged Knights. Yeah, you wonder if there could be some similar kind of thing where, like, someone doesn't have enough people to fight for them, that kind of thing where they have to, like...
Yeah, I don't know who would be on trial at that tourney. That is one of the places I think of, but I think it's far more likely to happen for Marjorie or Cersei.
Yeah, like the notion of the Faith fighting Maegor just makes you think of Cersei, right? Like, fighting against Gregor or something, right? So yeah, I think spinning it around Cersei's arc makes the most sense, perhaps, because of her going against the Faith. So I think that might be maybe it's going to come much later. Maybe it's like a Dream of Spring thing. Maybe it's like after the dragons and others are beaten and the land is trying to fix itself in the great aftermath period. Maybe that's when this will happen. Anyway, so that was a great segue, Shay, bringing up the gross brain part, because it is really tragic. You can't, even the people that get it, they understand what happened, they still can't help resent Dunk because it just, the pain the realm is going to suffer, and they can predict they'll suffer without Baelor is just so heavy. But this is written with some real quite possibly written with some real world sorrow mingled into it. And you touched on the reason this is so meaningful is this brain bit that you're talking about. Okay, this comes from Stephen Atwell. Shout out to Stephen Atwell, Race for the Iron Throne. Great A Song of Ice and Fire thinker. Nina pointed this out to us, and that he has written about this. Think about JFK. Okay, JFK was killed when George was 15 years old. George's family was Roman Catholic Democrats. JFK is one of the most popular presidents of all time, especially among people with that background. Roman Catholic Democrats, right? Like, that is the bullseye. I mean, that's literally what JFK was, a Roman Catholic Democrat. So this is a handsome, charismatic leader who was killed via assassination, and the descriptions of his death involve the brain, a piece of his brain coming out, and that was the fatal shot. He was shot in the back of the head, the same spot where Baelor was killed. So it's the same wound, the same sort of like promise unrealized for this leader that so many people cared a lot about. I mean, folks, it's hard to impart if you didn't live through it. I didn't live through it, but hearing people talk about this, just how popular JFK was, it really does give this Baelor vibe of just how tragic his death was, and how, the nation was so sad. Like people would put JFK pictures next to Jesus, like it was like the Patriots, Jesus, and JFK.
And I have to think people like George and other Kennedyites. No, I have to think that the people back then, when terrible things happened in the future, at least for the next 10 years or so, they had to be thinking in the back of their mind, if Kennedy had stayed, president, this would not have happened.
And what comes after this, right? More turmoil and death for the Targaryens. Well, Robert Kennedy was assassinated a few years later. So it's like that also continued. So I don't know. Do you have any take on any of this, Sean, or does this kind of...
It never occurred to me, but when you talk about it, I feel like it's got to have influenced George's writing here, even if it was subconscious,
Yeah. Like I went searching in his SSM to see if he talks about Kennedy or anything like that. I couldn't find any direct reference to it, but the circumstantial evidence is pretty damn strong, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, so so it is really sad. The funeral really does reflect that. So you kind of wonder if he was trying to channel some of that. It's funny. I went looking for just like more like Ashford Meadow. Is that like grassy knoll? I don't know. It's just like really trying to like find more about this. But I think the basics really do the work. You don't really need more details to feel this connection. So there's that sort of like great loss of what could have been and what was instead. And that leads us to. Did you have anything more to say about the funeral or the bargain or the trial itself? So much of it we talked about in advance.
I don't think I have anything particular.
Okay, cool.
I'll add this comment right now from Guinevere Greenstones about the trial. Might Jaime pull a Tyrion and request a trial of 7 from Catelyn? That would bring in the Duncan Brienne parallel.
Ooh, I wonder if they would accept that.
I wonder if we're past that point. Who would even be involved? I hadn't considered it.
I wonder if Jaime would be maybe the one to struggle to find 7 people to fight for him.
Yeah, exactly.
And then when they're faced with this, we move from the sorrow of the tournament, we move from Valar. You just feel bad for the kid. We don't know very much about him. We know I need to correct something I said earlier. We don't know how competent he was. We do know he becomes Hand after this. He takes his father's job, which might have been politics, but probably not, because Daron, was a good king. I mean, he's Daron the Good, so he probably didn't just make this guy his Hand because he's his nephew and the heir, but he might have. Either way, it didn't last long because the sickness came along so quickly. But you kind of feel bad for him. So Maekar summons Dunk, and before he goes to see Dunk, he once again, or while he's thinking about it, rather, he's thinking about dragonflies, and we get another quote.
Let's see. I'm not sure where you are. Sorry.
That's the one.
What shall it be, Dunk? He asked himself. Dragonflies or dragons? A few days ago, he would have answered at once. It was all he had ever dreamed. But now that the prospect was at hand, it frightened him. Just before Prince Baelor died, I swore to be his man.
Yeah, that's really a big deal. He's that vow. This is very Jaime. Right, Jaime becomes someone that decides that his vows are important, even though he's broken so many of them. He's like, I'm not doing that anymore. You can't make up for vows I've broken, but I'm gonna hold my vows from now on. Like if I swear something, I'm sticking to it. And he really seems to, once again, because we can see in his head, we know he means it. And this seems to be kind of a key decision here. It's not really about what Dunk wants; it's about what Dunk has already agreed to. right? He's already given his word, even though it was to a dead man. What does that say to you, Sean? What is that? How does that resonate with you? This notion that is a promise stronger when you make it to a dead person? Does that kind of carry you, like a sense of humanity? They can't do it. You have to. Does there an emotion behind that isn't present when you swear to someone who's still alive? It's kind of hard to parse.
Yeah, I think it could go either way. And I think there's other factors involved, because I can't imagine someone feeling more committed than ever, but I can also imagine someone feeling like, I guess it doesn't matter anymore. And it might come down, again, it might be person to person. Like some people might use it as an excuse to not have to fulfill some obligation, where some people might use it as motivation to fulfill an obligation. But some people might use it as a legitimate reason to not pursue something that's not practical.
Yeah, it'll vary,
or fair or otherwise.
Yeah, it'll vary person to person, society to society, I guess task to task, certainly.
That's a good point. Yeah. Good said, yeah. And that was particularly important here because...
Can I just say real quick?
Yeah.
I want to make a reference to King of the Hill, where Cotton Hill is going to die, and he tells his son Hank he's supposed to cut his head off and deliver it to Japan. And Hank's like, oh, I guess I gotta do it.
Sir Arlen, house motto, I tell you what. His sigil is the blue flame of propane. But right in this moment, he's thinking about what to do. Maekar also brings up the fact that they're both going to be the guy that is blamed for Baelor's death for the rest of their lives. So the fact that point being raised as he's thinking of the fact that he swore to be Baelor's man is going to really, for a man like Dunk, that's going to hit pretty hard. Having those two ideas side by side like that, like, yeah, I swore to be his man, and to be like this kind of person, he kind of already is like that. But yeah. All the more reason to live up to what you swore when everyone's going to blame you for killing the guy.
Is he thinking he's sort of cursed? You laugh, but I mean, Dunk really feels...
like, does he really? Yeah, he does. Yeah, right. Yeah, like it's not like a supernatural curse, but it's a social curse.
Yes.
Yeah. Very much true. Arguably, it's worse for Maekar because it's not for Dunk. It's at least not kinslaying. But it's pretty bad from a kinslaying perspective.
Well, I was kind of just picturing Dunk being like, anyone I swear to is colored by this and maybe doomed a little bit.
All the more reason to stick with Egg, I suppose. Egg's is like, yeah, well, I forgive you for that.
Yeah, I really like that. I really did appreciate that. That conversation between Maekar and Dunk and the aftermath in general, I think did a good job of dealing with the repercussions but on both the personal level and the effects of the politics of the realm or whatever,
Yeah. It's neat too, thinking about how similar this is to Stannis with Renly, right?
Oh yeah.
Right? Like the whole, people say, like, he doesn't even remember doing it. He's like, I must have hit him, there. I don't even remember doing it, though. Which is Stannis saying he doesn't remember the dream. He's like, I have this dream, but when I woke up, my hands were clean. How could I have been there? Like, it doesn't make sense to him. It's very surreal. But there's no doubt, right, in the reader's mind, right, that he was that he's partly responsible. The ins and outs, the logistics of it aren't clear, just as they aren't here, although they're a little simpler here, but still very, very similar. And I love too that when Dunk confronts Maekar with the point about roughing it and how maybe roughing it would be good for Egg. Do you remember his reaction?
Maekar's reaction?
Yeah.
I don't know if there's an exact quote, but my memory is that he was like, just walked off.
He does just walk off, but his jaw moves back and forth.
Oh, that's right. Like grits his jaw like Stannis. Yeah,
it's not the grinding. It's not the grinding, but it's very similar. So it's like, And they even gave Maekar pox scars, which Stannis doesn't have scars as far as I know, but his daughter has grayscale scars. So I just feel like, I don't know, George is having a little extra fun. He's like, how many more dots can I connect between these characters? That is not nearly all the connection between Maekar and Stannis, but we're going to do some of that in our end of Dunk and Egg wrap up. We'll summarize a lot of these a little better rather than just diving into them piecemeal here and there. So let's see, skipping past some foreshadowing. Let's talk about some of our funny moments as we close out this story. We'll do this at the end of the Sworn Sword and at the Mystery Night as well.
Real quick, there was a comment I meant to get in earlier.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
We were talking about good, how good of a knight are you? When he was asking Dunk, we were thinking about the idea good. It also reminded me of what Maekar said in that I don't know, that arraignment, if you will, when they're deciding to have the trial of 7. He says, "If a cause is just, good men will fight for it." I think you might have even said, "How much more plain can it be?" or something to that effect. But and I kind of also fits what I was saying about the idea of like Dunk. If he really is a good knight, he'll find other good knights to fight for him. And on some level, that's Maekar being the same as Baelor. Like, hey, it's in the hands of the gods, you know. Like if you can do it, that's what they wanted. So go ahead and try. But it also made me think about the what's that?
I was just gonna say that's their privilege.
Yeah.
They don't know what it's like to not have, you know, bevies of men willing to step up for them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Does he not?
I'm not saying there.
Is he not aware of the bribery?
This, but yeah. But another thing to think about is there's a lot of other ways to, like from a logical standpoint, if a cause is just, good men will fight for it. So if a cause isn't just, good men won't fight for it. If a cause is just, bad men won't fight for it. A cause is not just, bad men will fight for it. There's all those different ways you can look at it. And so on some level, it made me start thinking about the different people fighting on the different sides. Were they all good or bad based on, like, they had different causes, right? Maekar, his cause was really kind of to defend his family's honor. It's like, my son's got in trouble, I got to try to protect him.
Yeah.
And I think his cause is just. I think he's a good man, right? Like Baelor, almost obviously, Dunk, obviously. But Arian's cause was not just, and he was fighting, he was a bad man fighting on the bad side, you know? So it's kind of, it also sort of fits that idea of like at the end of however he meant it exactly, and however you define good, it kind of fits almost every way you look at it.
It's at the end of A Dance with Dragons that Varys says, I don't want to kill you, Kevin. You're like a lot of people, a good man in service to a bad cause.
When
you were just talking about that, I think that's very much in line here because, Maekar may be a decent man, but by backing his son up on this cause, he's very unjust. And that's a huge point. That's why I wanted to draw our attention to the thematic resonance of the dragon-y stuff with the others paired side by side, because both of those things are just enormously powerful, but they're not good or evil on their own. They're good or evil based on who's in charge of them. Like the dragons have been used for good and they've been used for evil. The others, well, they're all evil, but they don't, if they were created by the children, the source of them isn't all evil, right? And the people that work for them, like if the others are raising the dead of knights or people that used to be good people, they're using good people for a bad cause in a more supernatural way rather than you have to do what the king says kind of way. But it's the same sort of thing. You're compelled to obey whether it's good or bad, whether the orders are evil or not. And it's a big overarching question that George is asking every reader, I think, of to define good and evil. And but usually it's gray, right, in this story, but sometimes it's not. Like Arian, like obviously Arian is not gray in that sense. Maybe some of his upbringing, maybe some details around him, but like in terms of whether he's good or not, no, there's really no nuance there. Same with Gregor.
Sometimes you might find a reason for something, but not a justification for it.
Yeah, good point. Well, good said. So you cited you've got the first quote here under our funny list here. The bathing stuff here.
Oh yeah. Sorry, 1 second. Let me make sure I get to it here. Arlen, The gist of it is that Arlen is insisting that they bathe at least once a month, even if they're not that dirty. It's like, a true knight is cleanly as well as godly, the old man always said, insisting that they wash themselves head to heels every time the moon turned, whether they smelled sour or not. Now that he was a knight, Dunk vowed he would do the same.
Now, whoa. I mean, obviously, it's a different time and place, but hearing that they might not smell sour after not bathing for a month in the rough, yeah, there's a difference. They definitely have a different standard for what smells sour than, say, we would.
Yeah, sour might be relative.
It's like, how sour is it? Like, I like this one very short line. Dunk was as good an elbower as any.
Yeah, when he was pushing through the crowd so they could see better. And my thought was that if they make this into a show, they definitely need to have Ludacris playing at that moment.
Oh,
I'm picturing Dunk at like a Black Friday sale.
That's who you want to go shopping with. Yes, you definitely do. Yeah, and if Egg is like at a sporting event, like a puppet show, and you can't see, just get on Dunk's shoulders. There you go. Let's see. I like this line. Before long, only crestless men were choosing him, which is out of context. Like, wait, what? That's, of course, people who are not challenging Lionel Baratheon anymore because of his throwing helmets in the crowds and crests. But it's just crestless? What is these? Is this another thing about bathing? Is these guys that don't brush their teeth? Because
I'm picturing like lizards, how they have their crest.
How about this line? He seems a likely lad. Might be one day he'll make a knight. Yeah. Or the king.
Yeah. Maybe
this is kind of a weird term, by the way. A likely lad.
A likely lad, yeah. I guess is that an old English term? Yeah, like
I was kind of assuming.
Because we don't really say lad in America, but they say lad in England a lot, you know?
Yeah, does that, I'm guessing it means that he has promise?
Too. Yeah, I do. I think you're totally right. That's what it means, but... yeah, the boy shows
likely
promise.
Promising. I guess, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Whereas you might all otherwise interpret it as, I like him.
Yeah, like worthy or something, yeah.
His name is Lee Ladd. I like Lee Ladd. That's his name. Okay, so here's a pair of quotes that stand in contrast to each other. First, we have...
Boy, I do not require your counsel on who to challenge.
Then a few minutes later...
Hey, Egg, who's the least dangerous of these challengers? Hey, don't counsel me. Hey, can you counsel me?
Yeah, because then he's like, Egg sure does know a lot about these challengers. That's one of the clues that he's not, that he's actually highborn or whatever. Is like, he knows a lot about these guys, like specifics about how they joust.
Apparently, according to Guinevere Greenstone's, likely lad is a very common term, common enough that there's a British sitcom named The Likely Lads.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Guinevere
Guinevere
from
Greenstone.
the 70s.
In the 70s?
Yeah, 60s and 70s.
Excellent.
Actually, just the 60s now that I look at it, but yes.
Okay. That's cool. Here is what Nina says is her funniest line in all of A Song of Ice and Fire. Whoa, that's a big one.
You're not too tall, Dunk blurted out. You're just right for... He realized what he had been about to say and blushed furiously.
Four?
Said Tencel, cocking her head inquisitively. Puppets, he finished lamely. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, puppets.
Puppets. That's a likely lad story. Yeah. Puppets. That's good. So we'll pick out some more funny lines from the next one. There's always a few. George isn't like super big on out loud laughing, but he gets the jokes in there. He sneaks the jokes in for sure.
Ed gets a lot of zingers.
He does.
I think one of my favorite, funniest moments has to do with it's related to the art that's in A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, by Gary Gianni. It's the scene where Dunk takes a bath and Egg is, ministering to him in the bath. So he fills the bath water, like so hot, crazy hot, but Dunk like doesn't want to show weakness, so he gets in anyways, even though it's like burning his skin. He hates it. And the picture, the art in A Night of the Seven Kingdoms just shows like huge Dunk in a small bath, and his teeth are just gritting in pain while like Egg stands next to him.
Quite a bit different than the humongous bathtubs that Brienne and Jaime hang out in Harrenhal.
True.
Yeah.
There's always a reverse or a mirror. There's always a mirror or a parallel somewhere with Dunk and with a lot of other characters. Yeah. So, folks, we're still building a long list of fuller, completer list of parallels. If you have parallels and connections that you want to make sure we catch, send them to us. Do the same with any regular other types of questions you have or comments you have about Dunk and Egg. We will be moving on to the Sworn Sword next week. Let's do a little more wrap up, though. Did you have any final thoughts on the Hedge Knight? Anything that you think is Hedge Knight specific, Sean? Anything that maybe isn't appropriate to talk about in the following stories? Because obviously they have a lot in common, so some of the themes will continue. But if you have last things to say here, go for it.
The main thing is at a couple points that I've missed about the idea of Dunk being a true knight or not.
Okay.
We've hit on it a few times, and I think I've sold you, on the idea that it's not just this is or isn't, that maybe there's ways that Dunk isn't straight up lying, and that's kind of what I was kind of concluding, because I found most of the little arguments, like when I first read it, I was just oblivious to the idea that he wasn't really a knight in the first place. And but then the idea was presented to me, and I was like, huh. And I read it again. I was like, I see. I became suspicious myself. But then reading it again, I was like, I don't know. Almost every little piece of evidence I found could argue both ways. Some I've brought up, like, for example, piecing different things together. When Dunk describes how he was knighted, it's different than how Lionel Baratheon knights Stefan. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, oh, so he did. But then the person he describes how he's being knighted to, who's already challenging him, accepts that. He doesn't question that method of like, okay, so that's an argument. You see how it can be like an argument in both directions. And I started concluding, with these different things.
It's like Star Wars. It's an older code, but it checks out.
Yeah, yeah. There's another one was the idea that like one thing that makes people point at Dunk not being a knight when he hesitates to knight Stefan. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's because he's not really a knight, so he doesn't feel like. But maybe it's the same reason we talked about this. Maybe it's the same reason that Sir Barristan didn't want to knight his squires. Like I just attacked the prince, and if I knight you, they might and lose this. They might execute you. It might besmirch your honor, not help it. And that might even be why Lionel stepped up and did like, my honor's safe. If I knight you, you're good. You know what I mean? Like,
confident guy.
We don't get to hear what Lionel's thinking, and Dunk doesn't have time to even think about it because it gets called away. And I almost think it makes sense that all these things can be argued both ways because that's what George wanted. He didn't want it to be clear one way or the other. He's trying to be ambiguous. I think he's very careful about the different clues, if you will. Mm. The one sort of smoking gun, the one I have the toughest time with, that I'm sure Scott Wortman is like on the edge of his seat because he keeps asking about this, is the monstrous lie.
Yes.
Dunk thinks about the monstrous lie. He can relate to Egg. And
the line about, have you ever, you wanted something so bad that you were willing to lie for it.
Right. So here's how I address that. And again, I don't think I'm completely discounting it, but I'm showing if this was a court of law and I had to make my case, the case I would make is just because Dunk knows how it feels doesn't mean he did it. A.
That's cool. Yeah.
B. It could be something else.
Yeah. The story doesn't give us something else, but you're right. Like that's right. But you're right. It could be.
Another one of the arguments that people make is that Dunk doesn't think about the moment of being knighted by Erlen. But he also doesn't think about lying about being knighted by Erlen. So, if he doesn't think about one, doesn't think about the other.
That's true. He thinks about lying, but not about that. And he thinks about not being knighted, but the two aren't directly connected. You're right.
Yeah. So again, I don't want to just assume, like, I think it's clear George is trying to get us to at least think about it, which means there's a strong chance that it's true. But I still feel like there's a lot of evidence and no proofs. Incidentally, and this might even tie in later in one of the other books, but he he had a whole nother life before, right?
Yeah.
He was a thief and a beggar on the streets of Flea Bottom. You can imagine he might have told a monstrous lie there. He might have told some lie to Sir Arlen to get into his service in the first place. He might have killed someone there and lied about it.
I think he said.
That's another thought
doesn't
that I
he
had.
say that that was his first kill?
Who was his first kill?
Doesn't he say that that would be his first kill in the fight? That he just hasn't killed anyone?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think
when Dunk is fighting, he's nervous about killing people.
But anyway, yeah.
So maybe it's not that, but maybe some other egregious crime that he committed there that he lied about to get close to a girl, or to get close to Sir Arlen, or to get out of Flea Bottom, or whatever. Anyway, my point is, I can think, like, Dunk's had a lot of other stuff in his life that he potentially could have lied about that maybe he didn't think about. And maybe even a little further evidence to that point is another argument people use, is that Dunk, the first couple times he introduces himself, he just says Dunk and not Sir Dunk. Well, he just became a knight. He's not used to it yet. He doesn't think of himself that way. Like about people get married where the last name changes, or how often you write the date wrong when the month changes, or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
So, and it could be that the thing he did, the monstrous lie, was long ago enough that he's not thinking about it anymore. Anyway, I totally accept that so many people don't believe Dunk is a true knight. But I at least wanted to make my case, hopefully getting some people to rethink it, even if they keep believing it, that these are the points you're going to have to beat me on to prove your case. But what I'm really hoping to offer is a third alternative, is that Dunk isn't necessarily straight up lying about it, that Dunk just has some question about the validity of it, between his personal lack of confidence, between the potential of Arlen having been alcoholic, maybe even in his own mind, he's distinguishing between a hedge knight and a real knight. You know, I could just see a lot of ways why in Dunk's mind, he might not think of himself as a real knight. That when those moments come up in a story, we interpret it as he wasn't really knighted. But I want to interpret it as he's not lying about it. He's just questioning the validity.
Yeah, and one thing that supports, there's two things that support your argument pretty well here. One is that Dunk is the kind of person that would take it that seriously, that he would question the validity of it based on the circumstances, whereas other people would say, okay, it's done, that's it. It's like, it's I'm in the club. You know, they wouldn't question it. Dunk is one of the few people that we can honestly say might actually take that seriously, whatever ceremony may or may not have happened. Well, if it did happen in some degree, that it counted. And one thing I want to cast our eyes ahead for in regards to this is Brienne. If Brienne is eventually knighted in the confines of A Song of Ice and Fire, will there be people who question whether it's valid? And that would come back to this and be a parallel to, like, except instead of Dunk wondering, it would be everybody else questioning it. And Brienne might question it too. Who knows?
Even Brienne, by the way, even similar to like if Dunk had knighted Stefan, might have worked against him.
Yes.
Brienne, on one hand, often might have sort of a claim toward knighthood, at least, or deserving knighthood, having been on the Kingsguard.
Yeah.
But it was a traitor king. So it's almost worse.
That's
true.
You know, so. That's true. Yeah, these gray, it's these
that
gray
is
areas.
Interesting. I never really thought about her being on the Kingsguard and being a knight.
Yeah, that's true.
Have there been non-knights on a Kingsguard? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, but Clegane broke the rules, so Brienne kind of did too, I guess.
Yeah, okay.
Well, the Queen's the Rainbow Guard was a new institution, so technically they make up their own new rules. I guess they changed the colors, so why not the rules? So that's good. Another sort of funny half foreshadowing moment that I forgot to mention was Dunk passing by a tent where he hears two people having sex, and he's like, I wonder if I'll die before ever kissing a girl. Well, considering that there's a large amount of theories in the fandom about who amongst these many people who with large size are Dunk's descendants, and many of them seem to be the case, clearly he's gonna have some encounters that result in children. So no worries, Dunk. The women and the men both find you very attractive, so no worries at all.
I guess we'll just get there. I'll ask you when we're at the mystery night. Yeah, I'll wait.
Okay. So I think that does it. I don't think we had any other questions. Anything else to cover? There's always things we can say we missed, but hey, we're going on to the next story. So if you guys think we missed something, just shoot us the question, point it out. We'll bring it up anyway. we'll find some way to relate it back to this. These things always have connections.
Here's one more last little question.
Okay.
Did Lord Asford's daughter keep the title of Queen of Love and Beauty?
Boy, yeah, we brought her up like a couple episodes ago. Like, boy, this really didn't work out for her. Are they going to look at her as cursed? Like, this didn't go well. Like, is she going to cry about this? I would. I mean, if I were in her place, if I was a 13-year-old girl and this was this was all made for me, I was like, oh, I'm the center of attention. This is going to be great. And then this happens. Woo. That is traumatizing. So yeah, I don't know what her status was after this, but her emotional state probably wouldn't be so great. Okay, yeah, let's say some thanks here. Appreciate everyone coming to hang out today. Appreciate Nina giving us a lot of great discussion points and quotes, and especially special thanks for pointing out that thing with Stephen Atwell and JFK. That seems really strong as a parallel. Thank you to our people over on Flick and Facebook and Slack and Discord. You guys are also doing great work drumming up things for us to talk about and consider throughout these episodes. And of course, we're talking about other things over there as well. I mentioned it last time. We've got a Expanse reread going on in the Discord right now. That's pretty fun. We're still on book 1. So this is July 2021. That we're recording this, so if you could still get involved depending on when you're hearing this.
And I want to bring something up for when the Expanse reread is finished. I'm thinking we should get a group together to read at least the first Wildcards book, but maybe I'm hoping for the first trilogy. After that, we can scatter to the wind because there are many books. But, reach out if you have some interest, and maybe we'll start getting things in line for that.
Yeah.
Did you say wild cards?
Yeah. Are you not familiar with wild cards, Sean? You don't want to be a wild carder with me?
I mean, I'm familiar with Charlie Kelly.
George R. Martin, that's one of his properties.
Yeah, it's a shared universe.
Charlie Kelly is one of George Martin's properties?
Yeah. Funny that, huh?
But, Sean, Wild Cards is one of George's shared properties. Tons and tons of authors write in the world, different characters, and it's all about people with superpowers.
It's X-Men-ish.
But they're not just heroes, and they're not your standard powers. Yeah. It's kind of in line with The Boys, and what you would like there is my understanding.
Misfits?
Yeah, kind of in line with that. That's my, what I think of it as.
There's a famous story where there was a time when Neil Gaiman pitched Sandman for the Wildcards universe. They rejected him. George likes to joke about how it worked out well for him that we rejected it. So yeah, like it's not like super famous, but it's pretty big and it's been going a long time.
And honestly, he tweets about it and posts about it, and I would just like to see a tweet about wild cards and be like, hell yeah, what's new in the wild cards world?
Yeah, it's unfortunately when George talks about wild cards, too often there's people that just jump on him for it not being a Song of Ice and Fire.
I've even been to 2 wild cards panels, so it's really I should at least read one book, and I hope some of you want to join me in this journey of becoming a wild carder.
So that's kind of neat. We didn't know you weren't aware of wild cards, Sean. Now this given your enjoyment of The Boys and this kind of thing, this might be a big thing for you. We'll see. We'll have to circle back on that at some point. Thanks everyone for coming today. Appreciate the support. If you're a patron, don't know what we would do without you. If you want to join the crew over on Patreon, go to historyofwesteros.com and click on the Patreon link, or go straight to patreon.com/historyofwesteros and pick the level that is right for you. This is a great time to be supporting us when we're in between without lots of new material to deal with. Although, hey, we've never talked about the Hedge Knight before. It's kind of new, even though it was published in 97. Yeah. That's how it works.
Super new to me in terms of talking about all of this, for sure. We really haven't talked about this. I feel like the Sworn Sword would be the one we've talked about the least.
Yeah, like we've talked about the history surrounding it the most, but the events in it perhaps the least. And it's really interesting. I mean, a lot of people don't even know some of the connections Rohan Weber has to the greater story, and that's going to be fun. We really look forward to that. So, folks, tune in next week or download the podcast version when it's out. As usual, we record every episode on YouTube Live, almost always on Sunday at 3 Eastern. And then by early morning Monday, also Eastern time, the podcast version is out. Usually I stay up most of the night editing it to have it ready for y'all who are commuters Monday morning, or wherever you happen to be if it's not Monday morning for you and it's Monday morning for me. And we'll keep them coming, folks. See you next week for more Valar Rereadis.